Hi, everyone, and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. This is an open Q&A, so we will go pretty much wherever the questions take us on this one. Basically, what I think we'll probably do is we'll start with the Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, that world. Then we'll move over to Lord of the Rings of Power, and then maybe a few other random questions at the end as well. If you were looking for this live stream last week and it wasn't here, apologies. I took a week off. I was working quite hard all the way through both shows, House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power, and so I gave myself a week off just to recover. I am now fully rejuvenated and excited to be back. So thank you for all the well wishes for that. Yes, I did have a very relaxing time. Basically just sleeping and reading and just enjoying life. So exactly what I needed. But let's go straight into this. We've got a whole load of questions, as always, from my patrons. That's how I like to frame these live streams, by questions that I get from my patrons. And let's start. Well, actually, before we get into all of that, what I normally do is just say what's been going on in the wider world of fantasy. I may well have missed a few things while I was off for a week. To be honest, I cut myself off from the world, but a few things to look forward to very quickly. Firstly, Andor. I have caught up with Andor, and if you're a Star Wars fan or a sort of a semi-Star Wars fan, I would say for me, this is the best Star Wars TV show yet. It's quite a slow burn, in all honesty. The first few episodes I quite liked, but by the time we get up to where I certainly am at right now, which is episode 8 and 9, really good, really, really good. So it's kind of like a build up to Rogue One, if you saw that movie, but starting to ask the questions, how does a kind of rebellion start? Who plants the seeds of this rebellion? How do you grapple with these bigger issues about rights and wrongs in rebellion? It's actually really good. I would highly recommend it. So that's there. I think there's a few more episodes to come, but it's building up really well. Willow is coming out at the end of this month. For those who don't know, Willow was a film back in the 80s, a really fun fantasy film, and they've now made it into a sequel TV show, which comes out, I think, on the 27th. So keep an eye out for that. I've not heard any reviews of that at all yet, but I will definitely be watching. So just if you liked the film, then by all means do go and check that one out. His Dark Materials season 3, the final season, will be out at the beginning of December. And the last thing to say, Witcher Blood Origin confirmed for Christmas Day release on Netflix. This is, I've often described it as much troubled. I've done a bit of digging. I'm slightly more reassured about this now than I was probably a couple of weeks ago. There is a new trailer out. They've been starting to be doing the pre-publicity for it, so they are pushing it. That isn't just something that they're trying to sneak out under the radar, which was what I was a bit concerned about. So that's something definitely to look forward to. Witcher season 3 will be summer of next year. So that's a few things just to keep an eye on happening over the next month or so. I think we've got quite a lot of exciting stuff coming forward. Mandalorian season 3 is also going to be coming out in the new year as well, and The Last of Us. So there's a lot there to look forward to. And one final thing. Sandman has finally been renewed for season 2. This is excellent news. If you missed it, Sandman, it's on Netflix, so you can go back and binge it all. It was really good. It was a fantastic Neil Gaiman stories, comic books, animated. Well, it got turned into live action, but it was fantastic. Really, really good. So they've finally agreed to do a second season. This is, I think, part of the delay. I think is just a lot of the big media companies at the moment, they're just taking stock and taking slightly slower decisions on things and considering whether they've really got the money to be doing all the things that they've committed to. So that's why we've been getting a lot of these slightly odd decisions recently, or slow decisions, whether or not to renew Sandman. Why haven't we heard any more about all of these after House of the Dragon. I was certainly expecting something there. We haven't silence about where huge amounts of money from elsewhere, Amazon, for example, then these are going to be quite hard decisions, because we've got hard economic times coming, and the company, and particularly for media companies. So that's the world we're in. But so far, really good things have been renewed. House of the Dragon has been renewed. Sandman has been renewed. This is good stuff. Let's get into so people saying the browser is playing up. Is that my hope it's not at my end rather than yours? Do let me know if the picture quality goes or nothing like that. I'll see whether I can change something at this end. But let's get into a few questions. Shasha saying, hi Robert, I hope you're doing well. I am, thank you. What do you think is the exact relationship between Brusco and the House of Black and White? Does he regularly take in acolytes for them? Did Arya just kind of find him? So Brusco is a character. He's in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's a fishmonger, and Arya goes there to learn Bravosi, learn how to speak the language, basically. And then she goes and gets taken in properly by the House of Black and White. And then a bit later on in the story, she gets placed there once more as part of an assassination that she's doing. So the question is, what's the exact relationship? So people saying that it just froze for a few moments. Apologies, that sounds like it was just my internet. Glad it's okay again now. What is the relationship between him and the House of Black and White? Well, he doesn't seem to be a faceless man himself. He, however, does clearly have some sort of a relationship with them. Now, it may be that he is a worshipper of the many-faced god. It may be that he feels like he owes them a favor for something, but he certainly seems to be someone on friendly terms with them. Because when she comes back after having been away for a while, he just slots her back in without any questions, without any kind of like, oh, she's been gone and now she's come back, wonder what's going on. He just lets her come back into the organization and just pretend to be the role that she's being there, working for him. So that, I think, is it. I think that what we'll probably find in Braavos is a very connected city, politically connected. Everybody seems to be, George R. Martin hints at this a huge amount all the way through. Everybody seems to be playing lots of different games, politically connected with the Iron Bank, with the Sea Lord and the politics there, and also with the Faceless Men. So he is somebody who's connected in with the Faceless Men. He may well have other things going on, but he should just be a normal Bravosi. You also had a random tinfoil theory. Will Horace and Hobber somehow end up echoing the fate of Arik and Eric? So Arik and Eric Cargill, the Kingsguard, you will remember them from House of the Dragon, the twins. And pardon me, they separated at the end of season 1. So one of them joined Team Black, one of them joined Team Green. Now, spoiler alert, I should say this. I always try and say this at near the top of all of my live streams. The rule here on these live streams is that show spoilers are not on, book spoilers are fine. So I will never, if I hear a leak or something like that, I'm never going to be saying it on here. But the books, all of these books we're talking about, have been out for a while, so I will happily say what happens there. The adaptation of the show is not always exact to what happens in the books, so this is not a spoiler per se. But what happens in the books is that they basically end up having a fight, the two of them, and it's tragic, and they kill each other and they die, and it's the end. So this is one of the early parts of the Dance of the Dragons. In the Dance of the Dragons, it ends up all out civil war, huge battles, armies of thousands with dragons flying overhead, attacking and killing each other. But it starts off with just this whole series of small encounters. We've already had the first one with Vagar and Arax, with Aemond flying Vagar over to Storm's End, and then what followed on with that, with Lucerys. So that's the first one. Then we'll get Blood and Cheese, that book readers will know very well. Then we get small issues, things happening at Rook's Rest, then the Cargill twins like this, and it starts escalating and escalating and escalating until we get onto the huge battles with armies and dragons on both sides. So that's what's happening there. Could these two, Horus and Hobber, Redwine, echo them? They are twins who appear in the books. They weren't really on the show. So they're sort of minor characters. They are the heirs of the Redwines, and this is important because the Redwine fleet is a huge fleet down in the Reach, and it is very important for the Lannisters to keep them on side. Their liege lords are the Tyrells. So those two, they're in King's Landing right from book one. By the time the Tyrells arrive in King's Landing, they are both kind of obsessed with Marjorie Tyrell, thinking maybe they, one of them's got a chance with her. Tywin even briefly considers whether he should try and marry Cersei off to one of them, because they're politically important, even if they're not. I mean, they never come across as being particularly competent, it has to be said. They both got very sort of bright ginger hair, sort of carrot coloured, I think he calls it. And this is they're then arrested on trumped up charges by Cersei as part of her sort of attempted coup against Marjorie, before they're finally found not guilty. And that's where the story ends. Might they end up as being these twin brothers who fight each other? I think probably not, for the simple reason that they seem to be on the same side at the moment. There is no hint yet that they might break and one go one way, one go the other way. Also, that's not particularly, I mean, perhaps he will go down that route, and but the fight that they would have would not be the epic fight that we legendarily hear about from the Dance of the Dragons between the Cargill twins. This would be not comedic, but it would be a lot lower level than what's going on there. Martin S. in the chat saying, are you familiar with the Wheel of Time book series and the Amazon series? The latter, unfortunately, is not as good as I had hoped. A bit compressed. The novel series has a great and epic magic system above all. Yes, I'm aware of it. I did consider for some time whether I would cover it actually on this channel. I've done some... I did one video. I did an introduction to the Wheel of Time when just before season 1 of the Wheel of Time came out. I have read the books. I'm sort of listening through. I think I've got 3 books into listening through the season, through the series. I am sort of listening to it just before the TV show comes out is the idea, so I can keep up with it. I may branch out that way. I'm not sure yet. I do enjoy the books, so I should probably say. There are bigger fans out there, which is why I've kind of held back. There are other channels, excellent channels, covering the Wheel of Time. I usually give a shout out, and will again, to the Dusty Wheel. Matt on the Dusty Wheel is excellent. If you're wanting good content on the Wheel of Time, please go and check him out. Also, Unraveling the Pattern, really good. So the TV show I enjoyed. It wasn't epically great. I think there's the chance for it to keep on improving, but I found it was quite an interesting one for those who've read the books and also seen the show, I actually liked more the bits of the show which were new, which is quite intriguing because I think it probably shows that I'm less bought into that than I am something like The Lord of the Rings, where it's the opposite. I prefer the things where it's sticking to the books. With the Wheel of Time, I thought what the new things that they brought into it were actually really quite good. So yes, I have heard of it. And maybe I will do a little bit more on that at some point in the future. Brandy also just on this saying, wondered if I plan to cover the Dune books and movies. This is, something I get asked quite a lot, probably more than anything else, actually, Dune. Yes, so I've read the book 3 times, I think now, not for a decade or more. And I've read 3 or 4 of the successor books. I did really enjoy the movie as well. So I love it. I think it is a seminal work of science fiction. I think it's fantastic. I decided not to cover it first time around when the TV show was out. What I do every year, and I've got a question connected to this at the end of the live stream, so I'll probably go into a bit more depth about this then. What I do every year over Christmas is I just take stock and I work out where am I going with this channel in the next year. Don't worry, it's not going to change hugely. It'll still be me talking about the nerdy things that I love, but maybe I will take on something else, add something else to be talking about. Maybe I will branch out into one of the other bits of social media or another platform or something like that. I'll let you know once I've come up with those kind of decisions. But yes, Dune is definitely there on my list as something that I may well cover at some point. Philip saying, hello, Robert. What's the difference in power between the Lords of Harrenhal, Riverrun, and the Lord Paramount of the Trident? Lord Paramount seems to be superior in name only, but not the de facto power. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So the Riverlands as a whole, there are lots of houses that are ancient. There are lots of houses that are powerful and strong. However, it is always, if there's these mass battles, they always come around the Riverlands. So there's lots of shifting sands, and there are lots of ancient small kingdoms if you go back hundreds, thousands of years. So in terms of the relative power of these different places, there are a few different houses that we can talk about. We have the Brackens and we have the Blackwoods, who they've been at loggerheads for centuries, seem to be roughly the same level of power. We also have the Tullys. Now, the Tullys were not the oldest and strongest, but they were the first to bend the knee effectively to the Targaryens when the Targaryens invaded. So when the then big power, which was House Hoare, Hoarie, was defeated, then Aegon decided that what he would do was he would put somebody that he knew was going to be loyal in charge, and he put the Tullys in charge. And a lot of these other houses were like, why the Tullys? Because, we're older than them, we're richer than them, we're more powerful than them. We should also talk about House Frey in this example as well. House Frey are not as old, and they're not as prestigious, and they're not as respected, but they are probably the richest house in the Riverlands because they control the only crossing over the river for hundreds of miles. Anyone who wants to cross over that river, they can extract whatever price they want for it. Hence the action we get in book 1 with Catelyn negotiating with Walder Frey. So the Tullys are not the strongest, but in terms of the castle, Riverrun is pretty powerful, because it's at the confluence of these rivers, and they can shift the course of the rivers to basically cut it off and make it into a little island. So it's quite a strong river. Harrenhal is a relatively recent castle. It was built just before, it was literally finished they say, the day that Aegon and his sisters landed on Westeros for their invasion. Harrenhal at that point was indisputably the biggest and most powerful castle in the land. Huge lands, lots of income from that. But then obviously it got destroyed, melted, and nobody has kept it for more than a few decades. No family has stayed in control of it, which is where this Curse of Harrenhal idea comes from. So whoever has Harrenhal, this is seen as like incredibly powerful because it is still a huge and working castle. Yes, parts of it might well have been melted, but it is still a huge and working castle. And it's symbolically at the center of Westeros. Not exactly geographically. Westeros extends far, far north, but it's right there. You get the inn at the crossroads. We get the God's Eye Lake. Harrenhal is bang right there. So it is sort of the heart, which is why we get things like the Great Council of 101 happening at Harrenhal, because it's huge. You can house everybody, and it is in a really central location that everybody can go to. The inn at the crossroads, you should just say the crossroads, bang in the middle, is important geographically and symbolically because this is a point of decision within the story. This is the way that George R. R. Martin puts it. It's the King's Road, which heads up to Winterfell, all the way up to the Wall, and then down to King's Landing, and then down to Storm's End. But the thing crossing it is also, we get the Rose Road, which heads, you can head off to the west, or then you can get the High Road off in, and that goes to the Reach, and you can get across to Casterly Rock as well from there. And then you could go east, the High Road, into the Eyrie in the Vale. So this is basically the crossroads at the center of the continent, and Harrenhal is right by that, just a few miles away from it. So it is absolutely central. So in terms of the Lord Paramount is indeed, this is the title for the top lord in Lord Paramount of the Trident is the top lord in the Riverlands. It is an honorific, but it is also the person that everybody effectively swears fealty to, and it is the Tullys. So the Tullys technically are the most, at the start of A Song of Ice and Fire, technically are the most powerful or superior, but they aren't the richest. They aren't the most ancient and respected. They're not the most powerful. They don't have the biggest and best castle. So that's why they struggle to get all of these, their vassals supporting them so much. Let's go to a question from George R.R. Tolkien, saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you, sir. Interesting background photo. Thank you very much. I'll form my question around it. Do you think Mance Rayder, knows anything about Benjen's disappearing? Were they working together somehow? And is Benjen truly gone? Well, we get a few references. Jon and Mance obviously talk a lot. Jon doesn't really mention. It's quite interesting, and it's not clear whether this is in character Jon not trying to give away what's happening with his uncle, or George R. R. Martin not wanting us to have that, to see what the result of the conversation would be. But Jon does not really mention Benjen all that much when talking to Mance. He kind of, when he's talking about why he's there, which is the obvious question, why are you up here? Then he basically says he was there with Corran Halfhand, and he was there on this kind of training mission. That's where he's going. So we don't get to see that a big conversation. So the possibility that there's something there is there, but the fact is that Mance, when he does mention Benjen, he's talking about when he went to Winterfell ages previous, and he saw Benjen, but he says that Benjen wouldn't know what he looked like. So he's kind of distancing himself from it. Are they working together? I don't think so. Certainly the Benjen's story doesn't require it. in as much as him being sent out ranging north was a decision from J.R. Mormont. That was him saying, you go out there, you find out what was happening to the party we get in the prologue. Effectively, they've disappeared. We want to know what was going on there. So he gets sent off. That's not anything to do with Mance. Then we get to the fact that he appears to have come into contact with the others, because 2 members of his party get turned into whites. The whites that John and Ghost find, and they bring them south of the wall and then attack J.R. Mormont, those were members of Benjen's party. So he then heads off. They know this because he's got this secret sign that he like cuts into trees as he's going. He then heads off to the northwest, away from where Mance is, and then the trail disappears. So is there any... There's no obvious link across there to Mance Raider. There's no obvious reason for them to be working together. I think the answer is no on this one. But the fact that we never had that conversation means that the possibility does have to remain there. Let's go to a question from Lady Pushkins. Good to have you back, Robert. Thank you very much indeed. Do you think that George R. R. Martin's central message from A Song of Ice and Fire is the human heart in conflict with itself, and where that leads people, or do you think that there is another? It's an interesting question. I think George R. R. Martin would argue that there is not a central message of A Song of Ice and Fire. He hasn't put it in quite these strong terms, but he does seem to sign up to J.R.R. Tolkien, who very famously in the introduction to The Lord of the Rings talks about the difference between analogy and applicability. And I cordially dislike analogy in all its forms. And what he was going for was not trying to push a message through his story, but he wanted something which elevated itself to the role of mythology, which allows us to be drawing things from it without there being a specific moral that we're supposed to be taking from it. So I think George R. R. Martin would say that there is no overarching message, but he's very happy for people to be drawing messages from this. So, for example, quite a few people have said to him, or put to him, the others, the coming of the long night, this is some sort of message about climate change, about the us ignoring the warning signs, and this is coming for us and we have to do something about it. And George R. R. Martin is very happy for people to take that message from it, but that is not what he's been very clear. That is not what he's writing. He's not writing some sort of analogy to be making that point. So I think his top level answer to this would be there is no overall message. What you're saying in terms of the human heart in conflict with itself and where that leads people, I think that's not so much the message, but this is something he has said a few times. The only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. He didn't come up with that. I wish I could remember who did. Somebody clever in the chat, I'm sure, will be able to tell us in a moment. But that, I think, he uses as his mechanism for creating a good story. So the human heart in conflict with itself, we see this in some of the great characterizations in A Song of Ice and Fire. Take Jaime, for example. His heart is in conflict with himself. He clearly loves Cersei. He clearly is loyal to his family, and yet he feels this draw to other things. He feels a draw to Brienne, for example. He feels a draw to not just be caught up in all of that politicking. So that is a human heart in conflict with itself, which makes for a fascinating reading. Similarly, Ned as well, a human heart in conflict with itself. This is something George R. R. Martin plays with a huge amount. And we will see it more. I think we will see Tyrion, on his return, is going to increasingly be facing these issues. He does have a love for and loyalty to his family, despite everything. And that will be sorely tested if he is returning, as looks likely, as a part of Team Daenerys. So again, we're going to see the human heart at conflict with itself. And also, whether they go down they won't go down the exact same route as the TV show, but we saw that with Tyrion there, who clearly had bought into Daenerys as the rightful or best ruler of Westeros, and yet he started to disagree with a lot of her decisions, not just on a tactical level, but more on a kind of a heartfelt level. So that is the mechanism. I consider that, rather than the message, I believe that's the mechanism by which George R. R. Martin often draws us into characters. Mattia saying my hair was cut. I did. I got it cut just before I went away. William Faulkner, thank you very much. Agreed, Weirwood. I knew there would be clever people out there. Actually, randomly, Agreed Weirwood has a YouTube channel, which you should go and check out. I'm sure one of the moderators will put a link down in there. It's really quite excellent. Yeah, go and check that out. I had another question in the chat. Martin S. One thing I find slightly weird is the House Bolton flayed man flag. Usually those who do commit such horrific acts in real life and fiction tend to keep it quiet. Was it intended to frighten? Yes, it was intended to frighten. That's the whole idea, is that they plant this out for people to see, to remind people this is what we do with our defeated enemies. So don't challenge us. That's what it is. They allow these rumors about the Dreadfort and what happens there to spread out. This is that they are presented in a way as sort of an opposite to House Stark's approach, which is the rumors and legends of House Stark are spread out as well, but these tend to be more positive. And I mean, there must always be a Stark, and Winterfell is quite a benign but positive kind of thing. But the Boltons want people to fear them. The Starks want people to respect them, but it's not about fear. So they're shown as a different leadership style. It is gruesome, but we have to place it within the context of the far north with the really cold, dark winters. It's still horrific, but the context here is this is a culture as a whole that when winter comes, people will be sent out to die because they've only got enough provisions and space for a certain number of people to get them through winter. So some will just head out. This is a hard land. So yeah, it's gruesome, but intentionally gruesome. Let's go to question from Sam Chastain saying, "Hi Robert, Theon has been blamed for much of the things that Ramsay and the Boltons have done to destroy Winterfell. Do you think his name will be cleared? And if so, do you think Davos will have anything to do with it, given the North remembers scene in the Dance with Dragons? Or could Wex reveal that it was Ramsay all along?" So Theon is put as the kind of the fall guy for a huge amount of what the bad things that happened to the Starks. And this is crucial for the plot, not just because it's a matter of what happens to Theon, but because he is, as of the pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter that we got, the Stannis chapter, it was a Theon chapter, but it's basically about Stannis, then Theon is a captive of Stannis, and Stannis is working at what to do with him. How does he use this in order to get the support of the North. And his thought is, I should kill him because this is the person that they all blame for killing the Stark kids, and for turning on the Starks and losing Winterfell. I should do that. Now, the reality is that a lot of the powerful figures in the North actually probably know it's not Theon. Pardon me. So you say, is Davos going to be central to this, or possibly Wex? Wex, for those who don't know, is this guy who he has witnessed Bran and Rickon escaping, basically, and knows that they survive, and Manderlys managed to extract this information from him, and on the basis of this sent Davos to try and find Rickon. Now, that happened. Timelines are not 100% clear in that part of the story, but that sending off Davos seems to have happened a few months in the past, compared to, say, Theon's The Winds of Winter pre-release chapter. So I think we can assume that Davos will find Rickon and bring Rickon back. And that will be the evidence that Theon did not kill Bran and Rickon's survival. And people will know that it's Rickon because of Shaggy Dog. So, because who else has got a massive direwolf wandering around with them? So that, I think, is the ultimate thing. But there's a short-term thing, because what we have in that and that's a great chapter. I should probably clarify, George R. Martin has said he has gone back to at least one of those pre-release chapters that we've had and reworked it. So we shouldn't take these pre-release chapters as being absolutely right. But that one was the one, it was completed while he was writing A Dance with Dragons, and it was originally supposed to be included in there, and in some of the editions of that, it's actually included as a bonus chapter. So I think of all of the pre-release chapters, that's probably the one we can have most confidence in. But in there, basically, we reach a point where it looks like what's going to happen is that he will be sacrificed, he will be killed in front of a weirwood tree. And this is the weirwood tree is on an island in the middle of a lake. They're camped between two lakes, and it's a frozen lake. So the story is being teed up for him to be taken to the weirwood tree to be killed, so that Stannis can show, here you are, I am killing the person who killed the Stark kids. I am your rightful king. Follow me. I will dispense justice on your behalf. So that is where that story seems to be going. However, this isn't going to just end like that. Theon will almost certainly survive, because two things are almost certain to happen. The first is that the army from the Boltons is going to be heading down to engage with Stannis's army. And when I say the army from the Boltons, this is the Freys and the Manderlys, and the Manderlys are going to turn on the Freys, I'm absolutely sure. And there will be a battle, but this is not the Boltons against the Stannis's army. This is going to be actually a trap for the Freys. So, but there will be a battle nonetheless. Secondly, Theon going to that weirwood tree, we've already seen Bran seeming to speak to Theon through the weirwood tree in Winterfell, and we know that he can do that. And when he gets sent, or when it looks like he's going to be sent there, this isn't just like some kind of random thing. It gets suggested by Asher, but also the ravens, the crows, are calling for it. So this seems to be actually what the Weirwood Network want. So Bran is almost certainly going to intervene, stop Theon being killed, I think, at the same time as there being a big battle going on. And then at some point, Rickon is going to be brought back into play by Davos, and it'll be shown he did not kill them. Therefore, he's not guilty of all of these crimes that he's accused of. Therefore, we can now try and rally behind us getting a Stark back into Winterfell. That's my theory, anyway, of what's going on there. Andrew Kay is saying Stannis is definitely trying to rally the North, and despite being corrupted by prophecy, he is trying to overall do the right thing for the realm, though his corruption process will get the best of him. Yeah, so he's not... well, we know Stannis, he's certainly got corruption. Melisandre is working behind the scenes. Nate Davis saying, hey, in Deep Geek, any reason why the Targaryens didn't really take care of the wall, minus the gift? If they had that prophecy, why didn't they rally more support for it? Well, this is one of the key questions. I might do a video on this. Why didn't they do something? If they had this great prophecy, why didn't they do something? Because it raises some really significant questions. Okay, fair enough, this might explain why they invaded the Seven Kingdoms in the first place. It might also explain why they were so adamant in trying to get Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms, but it doesn't explain why they seem to have left the North alone. We do get some contacts with the North, of course. Jaehaerys and Alicent head north. Alicent goes and visits the Wall. We do get Aegon the Conqueror does, 3 decades later, does eventually make it up to the north, goes to White Harbor and so on. But there is a noticeable lack of obvious engagement with the North, even from Viserys. On the TV show, which is, it's not the books, but on the TV show, the North is hardly mentioned at all during season 1 of House of the Dragon. The Starks get a name check or two here or there, but Viserys caring about this prophecy, he doesn't seem to move on into how do we help the Starks in preparations in the North. It seems to be, well, I think the answer is partly Targaryen arrogance, in that they seem to think that the prophecy, again, this is coming through on the show more than the books. I can talk about the books in a moment with relation to this, but on the show, it certainly seems to be that Viserys just seems to take this prophecy as meaning our role is to rule the Seven Kingdoms and unite the Seven Kingdoms, and when the problem comes, will he be here to save the day? That seems to be where they're at, rather than we'll just go forward and do some proactive work to shore up the wall, to make sure that it's well manned, things like that. So there are Targaryen just sort of arrogance certainly seems, or literality in terms of interpreting the prophecy seems to be part of it. The idea that they must trust the Starks in some way does come through, though. Whether they've discussed this with them, that's something I certainly want to start thinking about. Whether there was this discussion between Aegon and Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt at the invasion, that they reached some kind of agreement. Who knows? It's possible. But they do seem to trust the Starks to be guarding the North. That said, there is still a missing bit here for me, and that's why I say I might do a video, because this is how I explore these kinds of issues, is by working through it, creating a video and coming to an idea about what might actually be going on here. So I think there's still a bit of gap in our knowledge and understanding. It might simply be it's something that George R. R. Martin hasn't told us yet. And the other sort of asterisk, slightly boring element of this is that it might be that this is a retcon from George R. R. Martin. So, and when I say a retcon, what I mean is he's a Gardner writer, as he's said so many times. When he's writing this story, he gets ideas coming left, right, and center, and he follows these ideas where they are. And some of them mean that he has to go back and sort of like go, oh, well, I should probably slightly change that earlier on, or I didn't reflect that bit. The bit that I've just thought of wasn't reflected earlier on. There was no foreshadowing for it, but I really like it. I'm going to go that way anyway. So that's the boring technical answer, is that this seems to have been something that is not part of the original master plan, but it is something that has emerged through the writing process. Andrew K saying there's a missing bit for sure. Aegon I, especially on Dragonback, could have gone up there before the 3 decades, but he did have southern strife and issues most of his reign. Yes, so reflective rambling say every time in Deep Geek says reflect, my ears perk up because I think I'm in trouble. You're never in trouble, Cassie. You're never in trouble. So there's a missing bit of information. We have not yet had that from George R. R. Martin. J.D. Finity. If Stannis successfully retook Winterfell and all Starks were either indisposed of or presumed dead, which family do you think he would appoint Warden of the North? So if Stannis successfully retook Winterfell and all the Starks were indisposed or presumed dead, who would he appoint Warden of the North? That's a really interesting one. So if I think his first idea seems to be, when he does think effectively the Starks are dead or missing, is to try and get Jon to be a Stark again, to say, well, I can make you a Stark. I'm a king. I can legitimize you. So that's his first take. After that, if there were no Starks, I think the obvious answer has to be the Manderleys. The Manderleys are the richest and the second most powerful of the families in the north. They have got the only real navy in the north, and they understand the culture of the south because they came from the south. They're not a northern family. They're not a First Men family. They're an Andal family. They moved up to the north. So I think probably he would go House Manderley. That's the most logical one. But for Stannis, him giving rewards to people and making appointments, it's a very, as with everything with Stannis, it's a very pragmatic thing. It's not just well, I think these people deserve it. It's how will this serve the greater purpose that we're doing here? He clearly has decided that the Boltons can't be trusted because they're siding with the Lannisters, so they are out, as are any people who are siding with them. So it would have to be Stark loyalists in some way. So the Manderleys, I think, are where he would end up. Ryan Milky 14 saying, I'd love to interview you on my channel. How would I go about contacting you? So I wish I could do... I get lots of these kind of things in invites. I wish I could do them all. I will say up front, unfortunately, I simply do not have the time to do them all. But I try and do as many as I can. If anyone, for anything like this, the best way to contact me is via my email. So you can find it indeedgeek@gmail.com. So you can send me something there. I will get back to you that way. But yeah, unfortunately, this is a thing which happens as channels grow, is that the weight of everything going on is suddenly increases. I mean, I literally get hundreds of messages a day, so it's quite hard work. So if your favorite content creator, not just me, but generally if your favorite content creator does not reply to you, please don't think it's because they don't love you. It's just simply, it'll be because they've got so much going on. So yeah, for any kind of collaboration kind of things, then email is always best. Reflective Rambling, picking up for Dave Cat. Thank you so much. I love it when people do this, picking up questions for other people in the chat. Is the ghost of High Heart a literal ghost? I could have sworn that she died in the tragedy of Summerhall, yet somehow she's still here. Okay, so the no, I think, is the answer here. But I think figuratively, yes. So the idea, so the ghost of High Heart is pretty clearly the Woods Witch, who comes down with Jenny of Oldstones way back in time, and delivers the prophecy about the prince that was promised coming from that line of the Targaryens. The colouring is very Bloodraven, to be honest. White, red eyes. This is very much a Bloodraven operation. She is at Harrenhal, and what she says is that she gorged on grief there. The implication being that she hung around, she clearly cared hugely about Jenny of Oldstones, and she was grieving for her hugely. Now, when she gets up to High Heart, she's called the Ghost of High Heart, partly because she's got a ghostly appearance, being very pale white, but also, when I say figuratively, what she's trying to say is that her spirit died there in Summerhall, but she's still hanging around like a spirit. That's the kind of feel we're trying to get from her. Now, all of the things we know about Summerhall can be written on one postcard. So let's not, we shouldn't get too categorical about this. She says that effectively she survived, and I think we should believe her in that. My trying to trace together what happened with her story is that she hung around at Summerhall. One of the things about Rhaegar's youth, details about Rhaegar's youth, which is often overlooked, is that Rhaegar kept on visiting Summerhall, which was where he was born, and also this place of great tragedy. And every time he returned back, he had a new prophetic song. And I wish I could remember who I saw this from. It was a post on Reddit from years ago. Pointed this out and said, if she survived, and we know if the Woods Witch, the Ghost of High Heart, survived and hung around in Summerhall as she claims, then she will have been there when Rhaegar turned up. And she is the prophet who is there talking about the prince that was promised. And then he turns up and he starts singing songs about the Song of Ice and Fire. So it's as if she has taught him this prophecy anew, the prophecy which at some point in this history of the Targaryens got lost. He is learning it anew from her. So that, and then after Robert's Rebellion, she heads up to High Heart. What might have prompted that? Well, there is one other big moment that happens at Summerhall entirely randomly, it would appear. At the beginning of Robert's Rebellion, this was the place where the three recalcitrant Stormlands lords gathered to form an army to fight against Robert Baratheon. But he got there and took them on one by one, 3 battles in a day, and won. I can well imagine if the Woods Witch, Ghost of High Heart, were there at Summerhall, and she hates death and things like that. She basically says as much when Arya encounters her. She will not have wanted to be around while there was a battle. So I think that was probably the moment at which she would have fled, which is slight digression away from where you originally started. But is she a literal ghost? No, I don't personally think so. Let's go to a question from Mara Lee. You did a couple of super chats just before it came on air saying, been enjoying all of the House of the Dragon content. Thank you. Just a show of love and support for all the amazing content, stories, and merch. Thank you. And Mara, apologies for missing your birthday. Happy birthday to you. Mara asks, George talks about show canon versus book canon during a lot of his interviews. Do you think that we will see anything about the Targaryen prophecy in any of George's writings, present as well as future? Or do you think this whole thing about prophecy will stay as show canon? So this is a really good question, because the kind of leads on from where we were a moment ago. George R. R. Martin has said, well, first of all, this show versus book canon, if you want to hear him talk about that, I would highly recommend you go to History of Westeros. He did an interview with them, I don't know, 3 months ago maybe, where he very clearly sets out in his mind there are now two sets of canon. There's book canon, there's show canon. And show canon, he's trying to keep it one set of canon for all of the shows, all of the successor shows. Now, what does this mean in terms of this revelation about the Targaryen Aegon's prophecy? Well, George R. R. Martin, when he was asked about this in various interviews, he basically said, yes, this did come, Ryan Condal did ask whether he could run with this, but this idea of Targaryen prophecy is running throughout the books. So he very clearly was hinting that this isn't something just completely random and new. This is actually based on where he is starting to go with this. So when you start looking through, you go, we've often talked about dragon dreamers, but he's basically saying there's a thread. This isn't just random. Sometimes Targaryens can be dragon dreamers. He said he's basically saying there's a thread. It starts off with Daenerys the Dreamer. Then we come to Aegon. Then we find that there are other dreamers as well. Perhaps, well, Viserys certainly seems to have been a dragon dreamer. We've got Helena, very, very strong here dragon dreamer. Cassandra figure being completely ignored by everyone, but she clearly is prophetic and can see stuff in the future. But then he's got, in Duncan Egg stories, we get Daeron the Dreamer, we get John the Fiddler, who's basically Daemon II Blackfire, so he's got Targaryen blood as well. He has dragon dreams. This works its way all the way through. Maester Aemon gets dragon dreams, Daenerys gets dragon dreams, and what he said, heavily hinted, is that this is not just random Targaryens getting this. There is a pattern here. And what he is showing us through the show, or allowing the show to reveal, is that is the dragon dream, the central theme of the dragon dream, is that the Targaryens are to be in Westeros for a purpose. They're to have dragons for a purpose. They're to rule for a purpose. They're to bring the kingdom together, unite the kingdom for a purpose. And that is the thread that runs all the way through. So dragon dreamers may be dreaming about the Dance of the Dragons, but because it's something which is threatening the future of the Targaryen family and rule, they will be dreaming about hatching dragons after dragons have gone, because dragons are hugely important. This is the thread which is running all the way through. So it's not just going to be a book thing. There will be some things which may, not just going to be a show thing. There will be some things, I suspect, which will just be show things. I think that the dagger, the cat's paw dagger, that feels very much like this is a show thing specifically, and some kind of attempt to show how the ending of Game of Thrones with Arya stabbing was linked in with the Targaryen prophecy. I mean, again, this fit that smells a little bit like a retrofit just to trying to make it work, but the idea of the prophecy itself is going to be in both book and show. Ran Milky 14 saying, just a little thank you from Scotland. Hashtag stay milky. Thank you very much indeed for that. Just having a quick flick through in the chat. Matthias saying nice things about the House of the Dragon content. Thank you very much. And Andrew K saying it's in the world book that there are dragon dreamers before the Doom. Yeah, so we don't get much history, don't get really any history of the Targaryens before the Doom of Valyria. So the first named dragon dreamer we have is Danis the Dreamer, the one who had the vision of the doom of Valyria. And we don't know whether other families, dragon riding families, similarly had these dragon dreams. We do not know any of that. This is what one of the things I'm hoping for from House of the Dragon is they've started touching on this Valyria idea, giving us a little bit more information about Valyria. Viserys there with his massive model of Valyria was already starting to talk about the mountain, the volcano, being the source of the Dragon Rider's power, that's new information for us. Hopefully they will keep on dropping new bits of information as we go through. Willie Biggs 2000 saying, thank you for the video series, Rhaegar, Robert, Lyanna, and all that. Expertly crafted and made me a fan of Game of Thrones again. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed that. For those who who've not come across that, that's my magnum opus on videos about Robert's Rebellion and all of the different angles of what was going on there, what happened at the turning of the Harrenhal, what was Rhaegar up to, what was going on at the Tower of Joy, all of that kind of stuff, and obviously how Bloodraven was behind all of it. If you want to do, I think that's on my sort of YouTube homepage, that series, if you want to find that playlist. Aegon Dragonborn saying, will Maester Marwyn inform Daenerys about the Maester conspiracy about the Targaryens? If so, how will she react? Will she execute the running Master order and establish the current Maester's order and establish a new one? I don't think by the time Daenerys gets to Westeros, I think there's a fair to middling chance that Old Town will be burning because Euron will have attacked it by then. So Marwyn may well tell her about that, but whether that impacts on anything she does afterwards, it's not 100% clear, because basically he wants to go over and join her small council. That's basically what he's pitching to do. He's going to go over there and he's going to be her Maester advisor. So she will probably try and, or call him her Grand Maester or something along those lines. When she gets there, if Old Town's gone, there will still be Maesters hanging around, but their power will be hugely diminished, I would have thought. Let's go to a question from Sam Chastain saying, hi Robert, in A Song of Ice and Fire we see the use of dragonbone and weirwood for weapons like the Dothraki bow, Raven's teeth, Brandon's snow. Do you foresee these materials being used in any endgame weapons, like some kind of modifications to the Sword of Dawn for it to become Lightbringer, or just in general? Well, I can certainly see them in general. So the weirwood arrows are, I think, a particularly interesting thing, because weirwood arrows are theoretically capable of harming dragons. That's certainly the plan when you talk about Brandon Snow. This was the bastard brother, I think he was brother, of Torrhen Stark, came down, and when we had this meeting, when Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, basically said to the Targaryens, okay, please don't kill us, I will recognize you as my king. And then Torrhen Stark said, okay, in that case, you are no longer a king, but you can remain Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell. That was the deal that was struck. But Torrhen Stark came south with his army with the intention of defending the North against the Targaryens. And Brandon Snow had got these 3 weirwood arrows that his intention was to use them to kill the dragons, and he was all in favor of sort of nipping across the river and sort of sneakily attacking them. So that certainly was what the Starks believed, that the weirwood arrows would be able to help destroy the dragons. We don't know what basis this has, where this comes from, whether this is some kind of old lore or something. But it's the kind of thing where we could imagine when the dragons come across, somebody will come up with this idea of weirwood arrows, because it's been foreshadowed back there. It kind of makes sense that somebody will. In terms of whether something might be done to the Sword Dawn to turn it into Lightbringer, I think this is going to be a forging it, plunging it into somebody to make it fiery is the thing. That will be the thing which makes it Lightbringer rather than changing its hilt or something like that. But generally speaking, these kinds of cool weapons, we will see more of them, because once people accept the idea there is this army of the others, the whites, it'll be, how do we get our most impressive and powerful weapons up to the front line? And you see a lot of these. We've got so many Valyrian steel swords dotted around, 200 allegedly weapons dotted around Westeros. We will hear about more of these being brought into play, I'm sure. Reflective rambling, picking up for Alhad Parashtika. This is from Joe Magician's theory about Larys. Does his words to Cregan Stark, when was a wolf ever moved by words at the regicide trial, have additional Weirwood Greenseer reference? Well, I've not seen his all of his theories about Larys. So this is about the end point. So spoilers: the Hour of the Wolf, Cregan Stark and the Northerners finally arrive down south right at the end of the Civil War, and everybody else is just tired and limping to the finish line, and he comes in and bosses things for a while. And the first thing he does is go, okay, so Aegon II is dead. Who killed him? And decides on who it was. And he's probably right. And Larys is one of the people, and he basically gives Larys, as with everybody else, the chance: you could go to the wall or you could get killed. And so Larys decides to die. Now, at the time, that felt like, in the book, that felt like he's reached the end and he's decided, you know what, that's it. I'm done with all of this. You might as well just kill me. If we buy into this idea, this is one of Joe Magician's great theories about House of the Dragon, is that Larys Strong might be a Greenseer. If we buy into this idea, then we do have this possibility that his death is just because he has achieved everything he wants. And if he is killed in front of the Weirwood tree, which certainly seems to be where the Starks would wish to kill somebody, it might be because he then knows that he will then be a sacrifice in front of the Weirwood tree, and so his blood will get soaked up by the Weirwood tree, and he effectively becomes part of the Weirwood net. So that kind of all adds up. This quote about when was a wolf ever moved by words is basically, that's him saying, he was given a chance to plead his case, and he basically says, there's no point. It doesn't matter, does it? Whatever I say, you've clearly decided. So is this a Greenseer reference? Possibly. I think we have to wait and see. This is one of those things where the show could take us in this direction. I don't think we've yet had enough to say this is definitely what's happening. This is in the world, and I think even Matt would accept this is still in theory territory, rather than this is looking like the most likely option. Marco F, how do you think Aegon, young Griff, and Daenerys will react when they find out that Jon is the son of Rhaegar? Well, I think young Griff, Fagon, whatever we wish to call him, I think he'll be dead by then. I suspect he will have a short reign in King's Landing, and then he will die. Daenerys, I think that the hints are that she and Jon will have a romantic relationship. Now, Exactly how that develops, we don't know, but the way they did it on the show obviously was that this starts by him going to Dragonstone to try and get Dragonglass, because he thinks that they need that in order to defeat the others. And that seems like a reasonable thing in the books as well, a reason for him to be heading down south. And if Tyrion is at Daenerys' side, when he left Jon Snow, they clasped hands and called each other friend. So there is a bond there, and he would recommend Jon Snow to Daenerys, and probably with his pragmatic politician's hat on, he would recognize that there was a clear advantage for her in marrying him. So I think that the chances are very strong that they do have a romantic relationship. And then they discover, or he discovers, or it comes out somehow, that he is Rhaegar's son. So this is one of those things where we always say it won't end up the same in the books. George R. R. Martin is very, very clear it's not going to end up the same in the books, but some of the beats will echo. And I think one of the beats that will echo is this fact that they will find out, and Jon, therefore, is not going to be comfortable with this. He's not been brought up with this incest idea. He doesn't like this idea. Dany will be okay with this idea. And I think that she will be probably thinking back, yes, so there's kings and queens have ruled together before. Effectively, that's what we had with Jaehaerys and Alicent. They joint ruled. So I think that is where she will want to go with this, and I think Jon will not want to go with that. But I suppose the bigger issue for her internally is the fact that all of this time she has been going through saying, I am the rightful heir. This is my birthright, is to be the queen of the Seven Kingdoms. And then suddenly she's being faced firstly with Fagon, who is potentially ahead of her in the line of succession. I mean, I say potentially because there are lots of questions. I talked about ages ago. I had the Westerosi Bar Association here, real life lawyers, not my lawyers, not your lawyers, but real lawyers, who talk about legal issues in Westeros. And we talked through all of the kind of legal wranglings here about who actually is the rightful heir of the Seven Kingdoms. And it's not straightforward. But first of all, she'll be faced with Fagon, then she'll be faced with Jon, who may well actually also have a Targaryen name. And Aegon would actually work quite well. So what it does for her psychologically, to whether she can accept the fact that maybe what she thought was her birthright is not actually her birthright. That'll be fascinating to see. For my people saying, I'd like to tie Joe Magician's theory to yours. By the way, Joe Magician, can one of the moderators put a link across to Joe Magician? Great channel, fantastic theories. Joe Magician's theory to yours, in that he was playing his part to manipulate the Targaryen bloodline to bring about the prince that was promised. It had to be Rhaenyra's line. Okay, so this is the idea that my working theory on Bloodraven is that he was very clear on which bloodline he thought was the right bloodline that should be there to have the prince that was promised. And he actively managed the bloodline, let's put it that way, killed off other Targaryens is the slightly less polite way of saying it. He was completely obsessed with killing the Blackfyres off, personally killing most of them himself. And also during his time, if you look at the amount of just entirely accidental or random Targaryen deaths, people being passed over for the throne, that kind of thing. It's huge. People choking on and dying on a lamprey pie, that kind of thing, during his time in power. Absolutely massive. So my working theory is that he was proactively trying to get the one line of Targaryens that he thought the prince that was promised was going to come from. Now, could we have Larys Strong as a Greenseer earlier on in the story, also trying to winnow down the various strands of the Targaryen family, so that there's just the one right family on the throne? And so this comes not from a mixture of Targaryen and Hightower blood, but from the pure Targaryen blood. So, which comes into that. So ultimately, we get the line coming down. It gets confused, as with all the Targaryen bits of the family tree, but ultimately this does come down through Rhaenyra and Daemon. So that very Targaryen-y, and on the show they played up hugely. They are very Targaryen, giving gifts of Valyrian steel, speaking in Old Valyrian, getting married in an Old Valyrian ceremony, compared to the Hightower side, where Alicent is going around with the Faith of the Seven symbol. They're getting rid of all the Targaryen decor in the Red Keep, that kind of thing. Could this be what's happening there? If he is a Greenseer, absolutely, I would agree with this. I think that the only thing for me thus far is I don't think we've yet had the evidence that that was what was going on. If we do get to the evidence that he is a Greenseer, then yes, I would completely add him into my mega tinfoil theory about how the Weirwood Network have been manipulating events all the way through. Jade Jenkinson saying, your videos are great. I've gotten so much entertainment from your channel. Thank you very much. Let's go to AK Channel TV. Alicia Kingston. Hello. Great channel. I hope one of the moderators can put a link in the chat about that. Saying, hi, Robert, do you think Aegon's children are actually Aemon's illegitimate kids? What do you think of this theory? And here's to all the rest of it. So Aegon's children being Aemon's illegitimate kids, which means that Helena, basically Aemond and Helena, either had an affair or Aemond forced himself on her. Now, is that possible? I mean, I don't think we've had any evidence one way or the other. Helena certainly seems to imply that Aegon does sleep with her sometimes. So I don't think there's a reason to think that they can't be his children. Does Aemond seem the kind of person who would do that dastardly deed? Certainly book Aemond seems that way. Show Aemond, I think, as with all of the characters on the TV show, they're trying to show another layer to him. He certainly seems to be that, I could, if it were me, I would be able to do this. And he also seems to I'd be a better leader than you. And he certainly seems to be showing Helena more respect and saying, there's that one scene, I think, on Driftmark, when he's saying, I would marry her and do what is right. So you should too. So we've not seen the evidence that this is the case. I don't think that there's a plot need for it to be the case, but the option is still there. It's possible. Snow Doge saying, hey man, I really enjoy your videos. Think I've seen it all. Keep doing what you're doing. Well, thank you very much. There are a lot of videos, so thank you for watching all of them. I think that's me caught up on the chat. Let's go to a question from Rhaegar Nargarian saying, hello from snowy Montana. Hello. As you've mentioned, Fagon is likely gathering the traditional signs of Targaryen legitimacy to support his claims as Aegon VI. Won't the support of the Golden Company be a bit of a red flag for Westeros, as it's well established that they were founded for the purpose of Blackfire support, and that the Blackfire sword was taken by Aegor? Or do you feel enough time has passed that they will get behind the idea that they could be supporting a Targaryen? I think this is an issue of who we're talking about here. So the small folk probably don't care. The small folk are in a world of if this is a good king, then we will cheer them. That seems to be where George R. R. Martin has put them, and Fagon seems to be, from what we've seen, a relatively good human, or a potentially relatively good ruler. He seems to have spent time with normal people. He seems to have a lot less arrogance than a lot of the other Targaryens, and he certainly seems to be very well read and intelligent and engaging. So a lot of the possibilities there for him to be a good ruler, which obviously in George R. R. Martin's world means that he won't survive for long. But the small folk probably won't, if they just get his, as we saw in House of the Dragon when Aegon was being crowned, here's the sword Blackfire, here's the High Septon doing all of the magical words, here's the right crown being placed on his head. If you have all of these symbols of legitimacy happening, then people will get behind it. The nobles, however, as well, they'll have had more of an education. Yes, they will go, oh, this is the Golden Company. They're all associated with the Blackfire rebellions. So what's going on here? So maybe a few of them might question it. But the fact is that in this world, might is right, in as much as most people who are the ruler claim it by some kind of strength of power, and he will arrive with the Golden Company, who are not just, this isn't just like a small handful of soldiers, this is a massive army at his back, and he will start getting support from the Stormlands, and probably Dawn is going to come in support of him as well. It would not surprise me, I won't go down all of the train of logic, but it would not surprise me if the Tyrells come in support of him, and before you know it, he may well have a lot of the south of Westeros on his side, and be sat in King's Landing, and so people will go, okay, I'll accept that, I'll turn the other way. The legal technicalities of who should and should not be ruler are legal technicalities often ignored. Robert Baratheon, or the Maesters, came up with this idea that Robert Baratheon was fair and legitimate to be king because he had some Targaryen blood in him, which was definitely true. But if you actually just follow that logic down, you go, okay, so the Targaryen blood is what is legitimizing him. There's definitely at least two people alive who, at that moment in time, who had greater claim based on their Targaryen ancestry. So people will look the other way, is the short answer. Eldrick Stoneskin saying, Aegon's prophecy alludes to a child of ice and fire to save the realm from the long night, but it seems the birth of Jon or Rhaegar triggered the return of the others. Do you think these dreams might be nefarious? Interesting question. In terms of what triggered the return of the others, it doesn't seem to have been the birth of Jon. The potential for the birth of Rhaegar / the tragedy at Summerhall to be some kind of a trigger is there. The reason why not Jon is because he starts at 15 years old ish, and the others seem to have been moving for longer than that. So this is based purely on what we know from what's happening with I've forgotten his name now. Oh, there's always every single live stream I forget the name of one important character. Craster, there we go. And in fact, at some point I've got a Craster video. I've been sort of holding off on it because people are more interested in House of the Dragon at the moment. But at some point I've got who is Craster video and what on earth's going on with Craster video to drop on you. But he seems to have been engaging with them for more than 15 years. So the I don't think that John's arrival was the trigger. That means that I don't think this is nefarious. I think that there's a possibility that the Weirwood Network can see, when we know they can see the future, and so they can start to try and make sure that the prince that was promised happens. This is where the Bloodraven idea comes in. He is trying to make it happen at the right time. So I think that is where it would be, rather than the nefarious thing. Effective Rambling saying, how dare your brain show signs of mortality. My brain is very mortal and limited, I can assure you of that, and it's currently on absolute max after a week's rest, and still I forget very straightforward names. Callie Summers saying, hey, we're about an hour and a half in. It's as good a time as any for all of us to give a big thanks to the moderators for keeping the chat fun and safe for everyone. Much love. Absolutely, I will use that as a cue. Moderators, you are amazing, and you've been fantastic all the way through both shows. I'm sure I said it as well at the time, but keeping the chat safe for everyone is really, really important to me. So thank you so much, moderators. If you are watching this live, if you're enjoying it, and if you are in the chat, please show them a little bit of love. I will also say I'll show a little bit of love to my patrons. Thank you. I genuinely cannot do what I do without your support. It enables me to spend the time I need to be making these videos. So thank you, patrons. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. So Nate Davis saying, you mentioned in several videos that H plus A equals M theory. Does this not include Jojen? So H plus A equals M. This is Howland plus Ashara equals Mira. This does include Jojen. So I did a video on this ages ago. I'm not the only person who've come up with this, but I think quite a lot of people have come up with this independently. I think that it looks very likely from what we've seen that Ashara Dane faked her death, married Jojen Reed, and they are now living in the Neck, and she is married Howland Reed, and they are now living in the Neck, and she is very happily there as Mrs. Howland Reed right now. So that is often called H plus A equals M, simply because Mira, being the oldest child, she appears around the same time as Jon and Robb and Daenerys as well. So it's just a where does she come from kind of idea, because this is associated with the TV show more than anything else. There were kind of connections between her and Jon. I think realistically it was because they both had the same vague color, curly brown hair, and so people were saying, oh, maybe they're twins or something. But this was trying, just H plus A equals M was just to say, no, Mira came from Howland and Ashara. And because they then went off to the Neck, that means that Jojen, the second child, is also from them. So yes, it does include Jojen as well. Martin S. Is Stannis a skilled warrior? I get the impression he is above average, but not at young Barristan level. Good commander. Also, previous super chat. Did I miss the previous super chat? I do apologize if I did. I will try and find that. But in terms of Stannis as a skilled warrior. Yeah, so he's more of a commander, a strategist, than a particular fighter himself. I don't think we've got any idea that he's a bad fighter, but he also doesn't go for any of this kind of frippery with being in tourneys and things like that. He's very much kind of like a Starkish kind of figure. I'm just saving this for battle. Is he the same and close to Barristan the Bold? No, Barristan he's way up there. The man is a legend, Sir Barristan, as a younger fighter. But Stannis seems competent. He seems good. He doesn't seem at the level of Robert Baratheon, his brother, who was for a short period of time an unstoppable force in battle. In terms of previous super chat, perhaps one of the moderators, if you could find that and then just try and flag that up for me in the chat, then I will get to that. Apologies if I missed that one. Sometimes the chat goes through so quickly that I miss things. Okay, so let's go to a question from Sam Bailey. I hope you're well, enjoyed your break. I did very much, so thank you very much. Question about House Stark's ancestral Valyrian steel sword. Why was ice in King's Landing? So from what we see in the show, I'm yet to read the books, it seems more of a ceremonial sword than one that would be feasible for use in battle. Not that the time of battle was for certain either. It seems it would have been better suited in Winterfell should the need arise to execute any deserters from the Night's Watch, etc. I wonder what your thoughts are on this. So, yes, Ned Stark brought it down south. This is the Stark ancestral sword, but it's the ancestral sword of the Lord of the Starks, the head of the Starks. So it's Ned's sword. It's not just one that he kind of leaves around and then whoever's like standing in for him can use. It's his sword. So it comes south with him. You're right, it is a ceremonial sword more than I'm sure it could be used in combat, but it is generally used for dispensing justice. And interestingly, the Cregan Stark at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, he brings ice down as well, but all the way down to King's Landing, and he dispenses justice with it then. So there is a precedent for this. Ned Stark is taking it with him because he is there to act on behalf of the king, to be dispensing justice on behalf of the king. And we know what Ned's thoughts are, is that if you pronounce judgment on someone, then you should be willing to carry out that judgment yourself. So if he is going to be executing people, he wants to use his sword. So that's why he brought it all the way down south. It's I think it's one of those things where we say, with hindsight, maybe he shouldn't have done. But he knew he was going into a dangerous situation, but it's just made sense. It's his sword. He's bringing it with him, and he will be executing people if he absolutely needs to. I'm just trying to see whether anyone's picked up on that previous super chat. I can't see that anywhere. So Martin S, if I did miss a super chat, apologies. What I will do is I will pick that up and answer that one at the beginning of next week's live stream. So it won't have gone to waste. I will answer that one as a priority at the beginning of next week. BG Main saying, what book is Robert talking about that is great? There was a TV show in June. I can only assume we're talking about Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon. That's what we're talking about right now. Catherine Fursith saying, I am rereading the Song of Ice and Fire books, and after the Hot D TV show, I am struck by how often Sir Criston Cole is mentioned, at least in The Feast for Crows, where I am at now. Arianne talks of how he overruled the wishes of the king and worked against a woman as heir. And more interestingly, Jaime talks to Loras about him at the end of Jaime 2, how he was both good and evil. Do you see any narrative links here, especially between Criston and Jaime? Well, this is interesting. So I went back and had a look at this with you having said that. So Criston Cole does get 3 mentions, I think. I've got one of them here, which I will read out a quick quote. So this is from Arianne, who is plotting to put Marcella on the throne, basically saying that in Dornish custom, a woman can inherit, and it also has sometimes potentially happened north of Dorne as well in the Seven Kingdoms. And so she talks about Sir Criston Cole, or thinking about Criston the Kingmaker. And I'm reading this out to compare against the account that we've seen in House of the Dragon, because this is quite interesting. Criston Cole, Criston the Kingmaker, had set brother against sister and divided the kingdom against itself, bringing on the terrible war the singers named the Dance of the Dragons. Some claimed he acted from ambition, for Prince Aegon was more tractable than his willful older sister. Others allow him nobler motives and argued that he was defending ancient Andal custom. A few whispered that Sir Criston had been Princess Rhaenyra's lover before he took the White and wanted vengeance on the woman who had spurned him. So this is like the various different options, but placing him, and we get this title, Criston the Kingmaker, is used again a couple of other times. Jaime uses it. In the show, his role, and indeed even in the books, his role is, in the books being Fire and Blood, his role doesn't seem that central. Yes, he clearly is a central character, but to say that he is the Kingmaker, he is the person who decided who should be king, certainly isn't where they went in House of the Dragon. In the book, you could argue that he was one of the most forceful characters behind this, but still you would say that Otto and Alicent played a huge role in that, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. So it's quite interesting how he's set up here as being this kingmaker, this central character in effectively the coup. But the question you've got here is about Jaime and Criston Cole. Is there some kind of a link? Well, yes, there is. I don't know the extent to which George R. Martin is wishing to play this, but they have very similar monikers. So we have the Kingmaker and the Kingslayer. Both of them have decided that they wish to choose who should or should not be ruler. As a member of the Kingsguard, they have made that decision, which is completely against what their job description is, completely against what their vows are. They have decided to take into their own hands, in these 2 descriptions we have going on here, who should be the ruler. So there is a clear echo there. The other sort of echo, I mean, there are echoes of being a Lord Commander of the Kingsguard at a young age, being good looking, having an affair with a member of the royal family, Cersei the Queen, Rhaenyra the Princess. So there are other kind of echoey links, but I think where mostly George R. Martin is going with this is the reputation idea, because what I was reading earlier with Criston Cole is basically he has this legend which follows him long after his death. He's the Kingmaker. He is the person who set the kingdom into civil war. Jaime similarly has this reputation, being the Kingslayer, and this is used against him again and again and again. And I think George R. Martin is wanting to just unpick this idea of what does this do to a person? What does this, having this hanging around your neck, what does this, how does it play into who you are and what you want to do. With Kristen Cole, it almost seems, certainly in the book, we haven't yet seen where it's going to go on the show, but in the book, he does seem to just suddenly get bigger and stronger and bolder as the story progresses. He takes over more and more control of what's going on, and whereas Jamie, and almost as if he's embracing this idea of being the Kingmaker, Jamie always kind of shies away from this being the Kingslayer. He's troubled by it. He doesn't want people to know, but deep inside, he's moving away from this, which is what we see his arc happening in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's breaking free from these bonds that he has had with his family, with his previous life. Let's go have a quick flick through the chat. I think I did have one more question in here, if I can find it. Philip, any idea why George seems to always mention certain POVs like Cersei and Tyrion when giving Wins updates, but never mentioning others like Dany? Good question. So, possibly because he hasn't written them yet. And the writing of, I mean, I don't envy him this task because there are so many threads that he set out there. It's very interconnected. So I think he doesn't mention John because he's still got this playing with this idea that obviously John dies at the end of the last book. So he's not going to mention the John chapter because everyone's going, so John is coming back. So I think he's kind of hiding that a bit, maybe leaving open the possibility we don't even have a John chapter. So that's why he's not mentioning some. He has mentioned, I mean, I think the one that he's not mentioned much is Dany. I think all of the others he's definitely talked about. Brienne, he's not mentioned. He's mentioned Arya a couple of times. Sansa, he's obviously written a chapter for as well. Tyrion, he told us about, gave us an update for. The implication with Dany there, and he has said this, the implication with Dany is that he said he was nearing or has finished Tyrion's chapters. The clear implication is Tyrion is going to be closely associated with Dany in the next book. She will, after she's finished her adventures in the Dothraki Sea, she will return back down to Meereen. Tyrion will be there. And then for the rest of the book, they are going to be close in some way. What that means is that if he has written the Tyrion books, the Tyrion chapters, he has locked down to some extent the Dany chapters. Now, because he can't write about what Tyrion's up to without already knowing what Dany's going to be doing. My guess is that he has been doing some Dany chapters almost in like little bits here and there. The bit I think is the hardest for him, or at least it was hardest for me when I did ages ago. I did a video on how big will the Winds of Winter be. And I just tried to work out what story needs to be told. The bit that looks the most complex is what's going on in the Riverlands. All of the other storylines, you can some of them you can tell almost on their own. Arya's story you can tell almost on its own. Some of them will be connected elsewhere, like Sansa, but probably not for a few chapters. Some of them you've got 2 or 3 characters all coming together, or maybe 4 characters, which is like the Tyrion, Barristan, Victarion chapters over there in Essos. But in the Riverlands, we've got so many different moving parts, and the story he tells will change depending on who meets whom in which order. We've got Jaime, we've got Brienne, we've got Lady Stoneheart and the Brotherhood Without Banners. We've got some people who've left the Brotherhood Without Banners. We've got the Blackfish. We've got the Blackfish's garrison who got released, heading off there. We've got the super pack of wolves. We've probably got Sandor Clegane, who's going to make an appearance again at some time. We've got lots of these different groups, and the order in which they meet will impact the story as a whole. So I think he's telling us when he's writing certain books. And if he is as he said he is, and I've got no reason to doubt him, if he is 75% of the way through, given the fact that he tends to write a character's arc all the way through, if he's not told us about a character, that's probably because he's not written those stories yet. So Andrew K saying the missed super chat. Thank you very much. Saying why are Bloodraven, Bittersteel, etc. always referred to in the histories by their bastard names when Aegon IV legitimized them all? Should they not all be known as Targaryen? Well, yes, but they're basically all. It's not the bastard names that they're remembered for so much as their nicknames. That's where we get Daemon Blackfire adopted Blackfire as his name. So he took that name on, so that is his name there. But we get Bloodraven is a nickname that was adopted. Bittersteel is a nickname that was adopted. Shira Seastar, similarly, an adopted nickname. So that's the name they're generally referred to in the histories. I mean, it's a sort of a valid point why we still think of Brynden Rivers for most of his. I mean, not most of his life because he lived much longer, but for most of his time, he was known as Brynden Rivers, but he just got adopted so yes, technically he was a Targaryen from that point onwards. Technically this wasn't Aegor Rivers anymore, this was Aegor Targaryen, but he was known as Aegor Rivers and generally became known as Bittersteel. So it's more to do with their nicknames than anything else. The Reflective Rambling saying, Matthew W's, could you see the Targaryens marrying into the Brackens, Blackwoods, and the First Men to preserve their dragon dreams, where they usually practiced incest for similar reasons? So I did a video on the Targaryen, or the bloodline of the Prince that was promised. I can't remember exactly what I called the video, but what that did was show that the bloodline of the prince that was promised, if you trace it back, this isn't just from king to king to king to king, it sometimes goes in a slightly circuitous route. And what are the injections of other families? Yes, we have the other bits of Valyrian, so we have some House Velaryon in there, but then we have the Brackens. Not the Brackens. They would love it. The Blackwoods are there. We have House Arryn, and we have House Martell. So what we have actually is representatives of each of the different ethnicities of Westeros, the main ethnicities of Westeros. We have the First Men through the Blackwoods, we have the Andals through the Arryns, and then we have the Martells providing the Rhoynar. So what we have in The Prince That Was Promised is not just randomly marrying in extra people into this. It's very clearly this is Targaryen plus representatives of the main groups from Westeros. Let's go to a question from Catherine Furseth saying, Joe Magician was talking about the swords that Hodor, Bran and Mira took from the Winterfell crypts and speculated that their choices might have some meaning. Since we know that Hodor will hold the door, holding back the whites so Bran can escape, is what sword he has somehow significant? I can't see him using Dark Sister for that. Thanks. Okay, so this is a really interesting little wormhole. So, Bran, Mira, and Hodor, in escaping from the crypts of Winterfell, they take swords from the crypts. The swords, if you remember, the statues of the Stark Lords, they all have a sword laying across their lap. Bran and Mira, quite logically, take the two most recent ones. They take Brandon Stark and Rickard Stark, so Ned's brother and father. So their swords are the most recent. They're probably going to be in the best condition. All makes sense. Hodor doesn't. Hodor just appears with, pardon me, a different sword. And this is the quote. Hodor's blade was much older, a huge, heavy piece of iron, dull from centuries of neglect and well spotted with rust. Now, this is interesting because he does use it. He kind of waves it around a lot. And then Bran, who has been taught how to fight, sometimes he walks into Hodor and he fights with that sword. Specifically, when he uses it is when they're outside Bloodraven's cave and you get the whites who are hiding for perhaps decades under that snow. So they rise up and start attacking them. Hodor is defending them, almost certainly foreshadowing for what's going to happen later. Bran walks into him. Hodor with his sword slashes away. Now, what we read is that sword cuts through leather, it cuts through what they were wearing, it even decapitates one of these whites. Now, it's not just an ancient rusted old sword. This is a strong and powerful sword. Now, might it be some kind of special ancient magical sword? It's possible. But I think we've all been sleeping on something which is mentioned early on in A Song of Ice and Fire and just not much afterwards. The fact that it is iron, and iron is important. Because we're always thinking, well, what can we use to fight the others? We need Valyrian steel, we need dragonglass, we need to look for fire. But what we get twice in quick succession in book one, Old Nan's stories, Bran and Jon both remember that the others hate iron. They hate iron and fire and the touch of the sun. So why do they hate iron? Presumably because iron has, is some power, some strength against them. It's a useful blade. Now, this is important because we've got this, and we're working on the assumption that George R. Martin is sticking to this. He does change the story, but it kind of seems baked in by this point. Hodor will hold the door in the books, but in a slightly different way. He's not literally holding a door. He is, and George R. Martin has said this, he is going to be holding the door in the sense of like, hold the door, prevent the baddies from getting us, we're escaping. Bran is going to walk into him, and he is going to stand in the doorway with a sword and just be buying some time while they manage to escape. Having heard this from George R. R. Martin, I then started thinking, well, just a normal sword isn't going to do much good, is it? So maybe he is going to be the person who has Dark Sister, which very probably is hidden in that cave somewhere. But now I'm starting to just come to this idea that we will see quite how impressive iron is. Why is it that the others are scared of iron? Why do they hate iron? We're going to see Hodor, 7-foot tall man, slashing around with an iron sword. Might it actually do damage to one of the others? I don't know. That will be absolutely fascinating. So, in answer to your question, is it significant what the swords are? I think the fact that Bran and Mira took the two nicest looking swords is just sensible. The fact that Hodor turns up with an iron sword, I think, will have some impact later. We will see why the others hate iron. Let's go to a question from Julia Erickson. Since Otto seems to really despise Daemon, how do you think his relationship with Aemond will develop? Will it be all fine since Aemond is a big asset to the Greens, or do you think that their relationship could also deteriorate? So this is one of these book we show things. In the books, #book spoilers, in the books, Otto will very soon get sidelined. He'll very soon get sidelined by Criston Cole and Aemond, who between them will start running this campaign. They, not very well, it has to be said. They're just going to charge out from King's Landing and leave it largely defenseless, but they're going to push Otto to one side. He is no longer, basically, Criston Cole will take over effectively as Hand of the King, and Aemond will take over effectively as King, because Otto gets pushed to one side and Aegon gets badly damaged in battle. So, how will Otto react to Aemond? In the books, it's clearly implied this is his grandson, let's not forget, but it's clearly implied that no, that does not work well. And the dynamic that we had there with him disliking Daemon, it comes to bite him because Aemond is going to act exactly the same. What will happen on the show? Well, this is quite interesting because the driving force for this is for pushing hard has been Otto on the show. Alicent was very much kind of, let's try for a more diplomatic approach, and Otto was the one pushing for, no, we should send out assassins, we should be absolutely brutal about this. Will he revert back then once it becomes apparent that there is going to be a war? He will presumably be horrified with what Aemond did. Will he revert back to being this kind of very slow planning kind of person, writing out letters to people, trying to get their support? Probably. So I think they will go roughly down the same route. I think that they will show that Aemond and Otto don't work in the same way. So he will still get sidelined. Aemond will still go charging out, attacking people left, right, and center. Whether they play this up as showing on the show, showing the relationship between them as being like that between Otto and and Daemon, whether they will show this as being a very much a big divide in Team Green, who knows? But yeah, this is not good. Team Green have got lots of huge personalities wanting lots of very different approaches. Kelly Summers saying, at death, wargs can lose themselves into an animal. When Jon returns, could it pull Ghost out too? He's wolfier, and it looks as if Ghost was a sacrifice. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but could it pull Ghost out too? So, I mean, what I will do is I'll just quickly set out how I think it's going to work. In that, Jon will go into Ghost, and he will be in Ghost for a period of time. We don't know exactly how long, but his body will be taken to the ice cells, and then at some point it will get thawed, and he will be pulled from his body back into it pulled from Ghost's body back into his own body. Now, I don't think that Ghost's consciousness will come with him. I think Ghost will stay there. But John, and we've been told this, is that this is what happens, is that if you lose your body and then you head off into your bonded creature's body, then you lose a bit of yourself and you become like that animal. So John, on his return to the human body, will be more wolfish, will be more like Ghost. He's not brought Ghost with him. Ghost is staying there, but he will become more like Ghost. And what does that mean? Quieter, more wolfish, more deadly, but also more pack. So I think that this is a fascinating thing. If George R.R. Martin wants to take us down that, and I think he will, we will see George's POV be turning a lot more wolfish, and that is going to be an amazing thing to be reading. Let's go to a question from Martin S. Would Aeglos and Narsil or Anduril harm the Witch King? Also, speculatively, in a crossover, would they harm the White Walkers and the Night King? Okay, so this is moving on into Rings of Power world. I will answer that one in just one moment because I've got one more question from my patrons about A Song of Ice and Fire. Then I will come back and do this one. We'll start talking about Lord of the Rings in a moment. Gadzooks says, "Hi, Robert. Hope you and your soothing voice are refreshed." Very much so. Thank you very much. So pretty out there speculation, but something that's always bothered me about the Valyrian dragon gene splice theory is that it seems like a horrendous experiment to carry out with potentially hideous outcomes in earlier stages. Do you think it's possible that Valyrians were themselves slaves at some point who had this done to them? Quite possibly. Quite possibly. I mean, we don't know. I mean, we get various legends of how the Valyrians first encountered the dragons. I mean, it's possible that they just had, first of all, they formed some sort of kinship with them, and then it was later when they, with their magicians, that they started trying to improve their bond. So it's possible. Could they have been slaves that others were doing experiments on? Well, yes, that's entirely likely. There are, if you go and explore out in the wider A Song of Ice and Fire theory world, then you'll find lots of ideas about places like Ashai and the Great Empire of the Dawn, and how in the depths of time, Ashai seems to have huge amounts of knowledge about dragons and things like that. Where did that come from? Perhaps they were the original people who were doing this experimenting. So it's possible, and it does make kind of sense that you would experiment not on yourself, but you would experiment on other people, and maybe this got out of hand. But I don't know. It's not the kind of thing that George R. Martin is likely to be taking us or telling us about, I don't think, unfortunately. This is one of those things where it's just like lost in the mists of time. Possibly, if we get more about the Long Night and if it's connected with the Long Night in some way, he will go down that route. But no, I'm not. I think it's going to be one of these things. Unfortunately, we don't get a full answer. In answer to your question, could it be the case? Yes, it's entirely possible. But I think we just don't know. All right, let's go to question Martin S. We're sort of shifting. I'll still take questions about A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, so do keep them coming. But Aeglos and Narsil / Anduril. Aeglos, for those who don't know, this is the spear that Gil-galad has, which was legendary in his time. We saw it a bit in the Rings of Power, right in that last episode when he sort of flounces off and heads back to Lindon. He's holding his spear with him. And it's quite legendary. Narsil is the ancient sword that it was the sword that was broken and then got reforged as Anduril. Would they harm the Witch King? Well, no is the short answer. Probably not. The what harmed the Witch King, it would appear, is this combination of this prophecy, but also the magics in the weapon that Mary had. I did a video on this ages ago. That came from the northern kingdom of Arnor when they were fighting the Witch King way back in the early to mid Third Age, and they developed magics which would help against him and wraiths, basically. And so that was what Mary, and I can't remember the exact wording that Tolkien uses, but that detached his when Mary stabs the Witch King sort of behind the knee, basically, and back at the leg, and that kind of detaches his spirit from the corporeal world, and then that allowed Eowyn to shove her sword into him and basically kill him. So it required that specific type of magic. Narsil was a magical sword. We don't know what I did a Narsil video a while ago, and Aeglos presumably is magical. We don't have much more detail about Aeglos, unfortunately. So maybe they would, but we're not told that they were specifically for that purpose. Speculatively, in a crossover, would they harm the White Walkers and the Night King? I think that Narsil and Aeglos definitely would. Yes, that's just my take. Mara Lee. Oh, hi there, Mara. Great to see you. Saying thanks for being you. Super sticker. Thank you very much indeed. And I had a couple more questions. Shadowand saying, any thoughts on the idea that Lady is warging Sansa to help her reconnect with Winterfell and being a Stark, or is it mostly homesickness? Oh, this is an interesting one. So, back to A Song of Ice and Fire. Sansa is obviously the Stark that lost the direwolf earliest. Yes, Nymeria was sent off, but Nymeria retained her bond with Arya. Sansa's direwolf Lady was killed. So is Lady warging into Sansa? I mean, and this is the idea here is not that Lady died and is still hanging around in some kind of ethereal way, but perhaps in the inverse of what happened with, or what we think is going to happen with Jon, of him Undying warging into his direwolf. Could Lady have Undying warged into Sansa? I don't think that there's any textual evidence that that's what happened. She doesn't seem to have this, oh, I feel a new presence in me. Certainly for the period after that, she doesn't seem particularly wolfish. So I like the idea. The thinking is great. But at a more sort of conceptual character level, I like the fact that this is a Sansa going on her own character arc, her own development. She is starting to miss Winterfell because she's starting to realize that she had these rose-tinted glasses on about King's Landing and chivalry and things like that, and that was just wrong. And we see that in the chapters, the most recent chapters we're having from her, when she's starting to think about, actually, you know what? I might not have found Tyrion attractive, but he never hurt me. And then here's this really attractive person here in front of me, but maybe that's not what I really need right now. And maybe King's Landing wasn't this great and wonderful place. Maybe the place I felt safest in the world was Winterfell. And this is her own character arc. So I love the thinking that this could have been a reverse walking situation, but I personally prefer the idea that this is Sansa's character development. Reflective Rambling. 2 missed super chats. Thank you so much. They do go through so quickly. I sometimes do miss them. This is from Martin saying, if Tywin and the Tyrell forces had arrived later, would King's Landing have fallen to Stannis? If so, how much later would be required? Would Joffrey or Cersei be executed or become a bargaining chip? So this is Battle of the Blackwater. The day is won by Tywin and the Tyrells arriving and attacking Stannis' forces in the rear. What if they'd arrived a bit later? They would have got into the city. They were already starting to break through. I think that is reasonably clear. Then would the Red Keep have been able to withstand it? Could they have held out in Maegor's holdfast? I think they probably could have done for a while, but not long term. So if this is just like a matter of a few hours later, then probably. But if it's weeks, then no. And would Joffrey and Cersei have been executed or become bargaining chips? I think that Stannis would have kept them prisoner as bargaining chips. So that's certainly what his instinct to start with was with Theon. He kept him while he was trying to figure out what to do, and I think that he wouldn't just execute them. He might have executed Joffrey, but Cersei probably not. And another question I missed from Brit. Do you think that they will include the Lysine Spring in House of the Dragon? Imagine the power struggle between Corlys and the Rogares. Corlys still fighting against Lysine with his death rattle. I don't think they will. I would love the Regency is actually on reread of Fire and Blood. That's my favorite bit of the whole story. I have to say that there's so many excellent elements to that. But if they're telling the story of the Dance of the Dragons, which is where they set this up as the story of the Dance of the Dragons, the arc of that goes from the Great Council of 101 right up to when the Hour of the Wolf is, and we will have the last scene will be something like the last scene in the book where we get Cregan Stark turning around and basically saying, right, that's it, I'm going home now, and then he's gone. That will be where they will end it. The mood music is 4 seasons, which kind of fits with that. I think they'd have to go beyond 4 seasons if they wanted to extend out into the Regency. So it's a shame, but I don't think they will. Jewel Elson, thank you very much. Super sticker saying hype. Thank you. Question. Bitter Steel saying, for your amazing mods, sort it out, however. My mods are amazing. But Reflective Rambling saying we are paid in Dan photos. Yes, you are, and I owe you some Dan photos. I have a plan, though. I put it all on hold while I was away, so apologies for that. But yes, Dan photos are coming. Warrior Girl 113 saying, in Deep Geek, Maegor the Cruel died on the throne with no heirs. How do you suppose the prophecy of A Song of Ice and Fire was passed down? He did have an heir, not his own child, but he named an heir, which was Aeria Targaryen. So he could well have passed it there. But the thing is that at some point this prophecy stops. And this is one of the most intriguing things we've got to figure out. I think as a fandom, we've got to try and come to some conclusion as to where this prophecy stopped. Is it actually in the Dance of the Dragons? Does it happen a little bit later? This obviously is a little bit earlier than all of that. My take is that we will probably find Aegon and probably both of his sisters knew it to start with. they will have passed it on to their son. So Aenys will have had it as the king. He will have passed it on to Aegon, his heir, Aegon the Uncrowned, who may well have again passed that on to his child. So this could be how the link goes all the way down there. But certainly Maegor I would have thought, got it from Visenya. He did not have any children of his own, but he did name an heir. So that is where we were, and we know Arya survived through to be around during Jaehaerys's reign. King Vaya saying Nampat. Yes, a good word. Let's go. And Nikorosi also saying a Nampat. Let's go with questions from Whitney. This is going into Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. Saying, hi, Robert. I hope you enjoyed your much-deserved break. I did. Thank you very much. My husband and I are casual viewers of the Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings, for reference. Why is it that Galadriel couldn't recognize Halbrand as evil when she could tell in episode 1 that the place that they were in episode 1 was so evil? Could you also please clarify the creation of those 3 rings? What will happen when the elves wear them? Okay, 2 absolutely fantastic questions. And unfortunately, I might not be able to answer because I don't think there is an answer. Why could Galadriel not sense that this was Sauron? I think in show, probably they would say because he was repentant Sauron, and so he wasn't being evil at that moment in time. I do also wonder, there is, but it doesn't feel quite right. I accept completely. It's just like, if Galadriel, yes, she was very driven and focused at the time. She was not really focusing on these things, but surely she would have sensed something. I do wonder whether we've got a situation here, though, with the writing of the Rings of Power. I do not know, but I'm starting to hear a few hints, and which kind of ties in with the fact that the filming of the Rings of Power was done in an odd way, in the sense that they filmed the first 2 episodes on their own. And the idea was always to take a break after those 2 episodes, treat them effectively as a pilot, and then come back and film the rest of the season. As it happened, that got enforced anyway because COVID happened and there was an enforced break. But we do know that they did make some changes between the filming of the first couple of episodes and later on. One of those was advertised at the time. An actor, Tom Budge, left the production. I'm sure there's a story there, but this was a creative differences is the way that they described it at the time. He was, I'm given to understand, he was the original casting of Celebrimbor. And Charles Edwards, who came in later, was a very different Celebrimbor to the one that they'd had in the original filming, so they had to refilm quite a few of the scenes there. And also, because he was playing him in a different way, they changed a bit of that arc. He was not in some scenes he might have been in otherwise. So there were some changes. And I've heard rumors that there have been other changes that were made. This idea that this was a absolutely agreed 100% planned right from the very beginning is not exactly correct. There have been some shifts and changes. They plotted that in by having this break between filming the first 2 episodes and the rest. So why am I saying all that? Because I do have this nagging thought in the back of my brain that perhaps some of the things we saw in the first couple of episodes are foreshadowing for things that didn't come to pass in the rest of the season. So this idea of oh, I can sense that this place is evil because da 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 da. You could argue that this was just in world. This was just obviously this place is evil because this was a place where the forces of evil gathered, and she knows from her lore and knowledge that sometimes flames do not give off heat in evil places. This is not just her having an evil radar that is very effective. It's just a combination of her general knowledge and just seeing what's happening around her. But perhaps there's also an element of inconsistent writing. So that's my general take on there. But yeah, it certainly did feel a bit odd that she at no point sensed something dodgy with Halron, particularly when he was giving off quite a lot of, I thought, quite strong Sauron signals from quite early on. Could you please, the second bit of this, could you please clarify the creation of those 3 rings? What will happen when the elves wear them? Now, again, this was something I don't think I can answer fully because I don't think they gave us the answers fully. Now, I will explain what the situation was with the creation of the rings in the books. This is in Tolkien's lore, is that Sauron as Anatar came and worked with Celebrimbor for 300 years. Now, they actually did a little nod to this, which made me smile. In episode 8, Celebrimbor was just sort of wandering past in the background, muttering away that we have to do this in 3 weeks. This is a task that could take 300 years. And it's like, that was a little nod to book readers that they know that this is being squashed down. But in the books, so Sauron is there in disguise for 300 years. They first of all create some minor rings of power. Then they make 16 rings of power, which will later become the 9 and the 7. But at this time, they're just 16. Then Sauron nips off back to Mordor. While he's away, Celebrimbor makes those 3 rings on his own. Now, he makes those 3 rings using the techniques, using the knowledge and lore that he has learned from Sauron, which is why they are connected into the one ring. But Sauron was not there at the time of their creation, therefore they're being created by Celebrimbor, and so they do not have that evil essence to them. So when Sauron forges the One Ring, it has the link to all the 16 plus the 3, but really the 3 are good and pure. Now, that's what happens in the books. On the show, they've shifted all of this around. So the first, those 3 on the show appear to be forged first, and they appear to be forged in order to help the elves in preventing their fading by including some mithril in there. Now, this is all complete show stuff. This is not at all in Tolkien. This did not come from Tolkien. This side that they are. Mithril coming from the Silmarils is not in Tolkien. The elves fading in the next 3 months, unless they can bathe in mithril, is not from Tolkien. So this is new, and they did not explain the mechanics of it. They did not explain what they exactly were attempting to achieve with these rings. The implication is that they forged these with some mithril combined with this gold that comes from Valinor, so is pure and good and bright, and this imbues these rings that they have got with magical sustaining power, which kind of chimes with what the 3 rings were in Tolkien's world, because they did all of them have a sustaining magic to them. But the implication is that what they must now do is take those rings and I don't know, go out to the elves with them, wave them over the elves. That is not made clear. But that in-world, in-show, seems to be what they are wanting to do. Until Sauron forges the One Ring, then there's no badness to them, unless he has been secretly doing something with them that we do not know about. So this is all quite unclear because they have not explained yet, or the clear implication is that Sauron was not yet fully evil, or he was down some kind of a potential repentance thing, which means that he does not seem to have been making those 3 rings or helping Celebrimbor make those 3 rings with the idea of, I am going to create a master ring. So perhaps in the show they won't have a link to the One Ring either. That would be where the logic goes. So I'm going around in a lot of circles, ironically, because they're rings, because the show has not told us. This is a complete break from Tolkien's understanding of the creation of the rings, and the purpose of the creation of the rings is completely different, but they have not yet told us exactly what they're going to be doing with these. So it's not clear is the answer to your question. Question from the chat. Bitter Steel. Just disappeared for me. But here we go. Bitter Steel saying, and this is going back to Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire. How much would Westeros have changed if Baelor Breakspear didn't die in Ashford? Well, it's a really interesting question. So Baelor Breakspear was the guy. He was the Crown Prince who died defending Dunk. Now, he seemed a really good person. He seemed like he could have proven to be a really good ruler. My take is that this is one of those many accidents that happened during that period that brings us to this single line of Targaryens, which is what Bloodraven wanted. I think Baelor Breakspear would have died in another way if he hadn't died at Ashford Meadow. I think that is as brutally simple as that. I think Bloodraven was pruning the family tree. That if he weren't, then Baelor would have taken over as king and ruled wisely and good. Aegon V would never have ruled, and so Rhaegal and that line would never have come to power, is the short answer. Bittersteel saying, would he be as influenced by dreams causing the Targaryens, causing the dragons' decline? I mean, possibly. We don't know, but as I say, I think the answer is that he will be he will be killed in another way. I don't think that Bloodraven would have allowed it. Alice, to you saying, sorry, I know you're on Lord of the Rings, but do you think that George R. R. Martin's Jon Snow character was heavily influenced by Aragorn? I've never heard George R. R. Martin talk about it, but at least show Jon is quite similar in heritage, etc. Yeah, well, I will come back to, I've not said this for a while, so that this might be new to some people, but my take is that George R. R. Martin has written Jon Snow as if he is Aragorn, but in reality, he's Frodo. What I mean by that is that we are supposed to be seeing Jon as this great heroic figure who is secretly the heir to the throne and the heir to prophecy, and he is the person who's going to come and rule and everything's going to be okay. But in reality, the last thing we see with Jon is that he's going to be broken by events. He is going to be the person who is going to do what has to be done to save the world, and then at the end of it, he is too broken by that to be able to enjoy it. And Frodo had to sail off to the west, and he will have to head off to the north. So that is my take. I think, although he doesn't specifically talk about it, yes, I think he's echoing Aragorn in the way that he is showing the character. They're not the same character. He's not cut and pasted it, but he's trying to create that Aragorn vibe to him. But really, he's Frodo. He's already got his Sam, for example. Let's go to Ranabir Mitra saying, is there never going to be a bit of when in doubt, blame Bloodraven? I keep on meaning to do it. I'm sorry. I know I've been saying this now for probably a couple of years now, but I keep on meaning to do it, and I will at some point do it when I have time. Hopefully, now I've got more energy, I can get back to it. Let's go to Mara Lee question, Lord of the Rings question. We saw at the end of the Rings of Power that the 3 rings for the elves were forged. We know that other rings will also have to be forged and then later given to the dwarves and men. Do you think we will see Halbrand come back to meet with Celebrimbor to get this done? Will Sauron come back as Halbrand, or do you think as a different character, seeing as that we know Sauron is a shapeshifter? Yeah, so there's lots of questions here. Because they've shifted this around, the order of the creation of the rings, I mean, don't completely discount the idea that Sauron has secretly been making rings in the past on the show. And so when he's going back to Mordor now, he is going to forge the One Ring. They might retrofit that in some way. I hope they haven't, but they could. There's something in his little pouch. I'm sure of it. This isn't just a badge carrier for showing his claim to be the ruler. It's got something in that pouch. But how, if we assume that they've just shifted the order around, so the 3 are made first, and then he's going to go back and make the other 16. What that means is, we've already had a hint of this, is that Galadriel says, don't let that man come back here, or something along those lines. And then it cut to Celebrimbor. Now, what she didn't do was say, because he's Sauron in disguise. So it's possible that she won't say that to Celebrimbor. And so if Halbrand comes back and says there's been a huge mistake, I'd love to show you how to make a few more rings of power, maybe Celebrimbor will ignore Galadriel's advice because she's headed off somewhere to do some other things, and maybe Celebrimbor, maybe Sauron, Halron will come back and forge those 16 rings afterwards. We don't know. I think if he came back with another disguise and said, hi, I'm someone completely different, come here to forge some rings of power with you, then I think that Celebrimbor, he seems a clever chap. He shouldn't be taken in by that. So the most obvious thing for Galadriel to do is to say this, admit this was Sauron, I got duped. But they seem not to be going down that route. So if so, that adds to another thing that Galadriel's a mistake that she will have to learn from, is that maybe she should trust people some more. Let's go to a question from Diego. Actually, Reflective Rambling just in the chat saying, how many lesser or practice rings were made, and are they all embodied with negative consequences? Is it possible for those made with good intention not to have as drastic downfalls? Well, this is really interesting. I did a video on the lesser rings ages ago. Basically, these were what Gandalf calls essays in the craft. So they are not as powerful as the main rings, but they do still seem they are magical, and they do still seem to have hints. They were made by Sauron with Celebrimbor using the same techniques. So the implication is that they've got a downside. What Gandalf says basically is that when Bilbo found the One Ring, Gandalf didn't think, of course, why would you think, it's the One Ring? He just thinks he's found a magic ring that makes him invisible. So Gandalf thinks this is one of those lesser rings, probably. And he warns him that all magical rings are dangerous. Basically, he says that, yes, I know this is useful, but just beware, it's not to be trifled with. So Gandalf is wary of the lesser rings, and it's only a bit later than he starts to think, oh, hang on a moment, maybe this is the One Ring, and then he has to go off and do all of his research. But yeah, the lesser rings, we're not told how many, certainly probably quite a few. Most of them must have got lost somewhere along the way, but for Gandalf to assume that this is a lesser ring seems to imply that there are some out there in the world, and he doesn't know, they're not all catalogued, so he doesn't know exactly what powers each of them has. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. Regarding the world of Middle-earth, did Tolkien ever mention or write about what the future of the world would be like? I mean, he created the world literally from its beginning with Eru Ilúvatar and the Ainur, but did he ever mention what the future of Middle-earth would be in cosmic timescales? Thanks. Yes, he did. So he talked about what happened immediately after that, in the few years after the events of the Lord of the Rings. Then, though, it's the dominion of man. And the short answer is that that world is this world. So Middle-earth is our world, but not at a different moment in time. There's a fabulous, a rare TV interview with Tolkien that you can find somewhere on YouTube, where he makes this point. He says it's not our world in a different moment in time, but in a different moment of imagination. So it is our world, and it somehow moves from that to us. And his writing conceit is that he is merely uncovering these documents and retelling the stories from what he's discovered from the ancient times, from this different stage of imagination. So he often would reply to letters sort of saying, when somebody says, could you just tell me what's going on here or what that is about, and he would say, well, I don't think we really know. Maybe we'll discover a paper sometime where that'll tell us this or that. He actually gets properly into character as if he is part of this world. So that world is this world, but in a kind of like a meta level, then he has this idea that, yes, this world will end. The world of Middle-earth will end. There is this final battle. I did do a video again on that one. It was we've got Dagor Dagarath, he calls it, basically, and but it's told in sort of elf legends of what will come. And so Morgoth will return once more, effectively the great Satan figure, and he will get defeated. He will get defeated, the final blow from Turin, and then there will be the equivalent of a new heaven and a new earth. So that's what it's very building on his sort of Catholic ideology of like, there will be this final battle and then there will be a new heaven and a new earth, but in a different imaginative world. That's what we're looking at there. Marley saying, in the last episode we saw Halbrand Sauron returning to Mordor to reclaim his kingdom and possibly defeat Adar as ruler. How do you suppose he will do this? By killing Adar and threatening the orcs? Or do you think he might have a more devious plan up his sleeve? Well, this is quite hard to say, because again, this is done in a very different way. In the show, have taken it a different way to the books. In the book, he had built up Mordor as his home base, and then he went off as Anator to try and trick the elves, and then he nipped back from there, and it was already his homeland. Here, it's not his homeland anymore. Adar is effectively in control, so what's he going to do? The obvious answer is, if he has now decided that's it, I'm going to have to rule and be in charge, is he can just shapeshift into his evil Sauron with a big mace kind of thing and just swat Adar out of the way. He is much more powerful than Adar, and so he could just do that. That probably wouldn't make for great TV, though. I do wonder whether we're going to see some kind of intricate plot point with Isildur. Isildur is in Mordor and has been left for dead, and everyone assumes he's dead and nobody's looking for him. His horse has gone off to find him, but that's it. So I do wonder whether we're going to get some kind of moment between him and Sauron that will echo forward to the end of all of this, which we know is he defeats Sauron by cutting the ring from his finger. So I wonder whether Isildur will be spending more than just the first half an episode of season 2 in Mordor. It depends what Adar is trying to do. If he then tries to get people to build Barad-dûr, maybe they're even going to go down that route, that Sauron doesn't make Barad-dûr, then Adar does, and Sauron just comes in, waits for Adar to do everything, and then he takes over. They could even leave it allow Adar to create this wonderful orc homeland, and maybe season 2 we literally just have Sauron sort of dipping in and out and secretly making rings, and only much later does he try and take on Adar. I don't know. I hope Adar survives for a while, because I thought he was the best new character that we had there by quite a long way. Let's go to some sort of broader questions, and then I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can in the chat. 444 saying, "Hi Robert, there was an interesting discussion about adaptations with George R. R. Martin and Neil Gaiman's involvement, where George stated that he hated the phrase, 'I'm going to make it my own.'" This is a recent, George R. R. Martin and Neil Gaiman did a joint interview, sort of presentation, really. In previous interviews, both authors mentioned that many times they've declined ideas for adaptations of A Song of Ice and Fire and Sandman. And Gaiman even admitted to actively trying to sabotage one particularly bad one. What's the issue with so many bad adaptation ideas? Is it because too many screenwriters have a big issue? Is it the problem of too many parents for film and TV when books have rarely many authors? Well, I think it's a lot of different things. I think that to try and twist it the other way around first, I think sometimes authors just want a straight adaptation of what they've done because this is their baby and they want this as close as possible to what it is. I do not take the view that every single time the closest adaptation is necessarily the best. Sometimes you can have something that veers away from the original but is still an excellent work of art. For example, Blade Runner, the director's cut, is not a very good adaptation of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a great book, but the adaptation to screen kept a lot of the original ideas and plot, but shifted it quite considerably. And I think it's a work of art. Blade Runner Director's Cut, one of the finest films ever made. So I don't subscribe to the idea that necessarily everything has to be exactly a close adaptation. That said, obviously, I like close adaptations of things that I love. So writers often do not want that kind of different approach taken to their work. So that's one element. And in terms of why are there so many bad adaptations, I think, yes, there are too many cooks spoil the broth is often the case. I think that we do get showrunners who may well have a passion for a particular project, but then in order to make it work, you will find studio execs say, well, we need to squash this down, or we need to take these creative routes, or something like that. So it's quite rare, but very reassuring when a close and strong adaptation comes along, like with Sandman, like with House of the Dragon. You also said, would you consider including in your updates from the wider world of fantasy or science fiction animation projects, something like the War of the Rohirrim, or the next seasons of Arcane or Legend of Vox Machina? So yeah, I talked about this a little bit earlier. I'm very happy in thinking about where else I might go with this channel, what I might expand to, other things like that. In terms of War of the Rohirrim, if you don't know about it, this is an adaptation from a story which appears in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings from the history of the Rohirrim. I'm really looking forward to it. This is going to be animated rather than live action, but it sounds like it's got some good people involved in it. Philippa Boyens, for example, who was key in the development of the Peter Jackson films, is actively involved in this. I will be covering that. It won't be till 2024. I will definitely be covering that. I will also definitely be covering, if there were, for example, some animated spin-offs of Game of Thrones, like the Yi one we keep on hearing about, then I will definitely be covering that. I did a video on the Nightmare of the Wolf, which was a Witcher spin-off. So yes, I've absolutely. In terms of the two things you mentioned, Arcane and Legend of Vox Machina, both are excellent. I love them. They are the kinds of things that I might at some point cover, if only in a introduction to. I've really enjoyed, just over the last year or so, for various things, doing an introduction to video, which isn't a hugely deep dive into something, but it is just trying to, for people who don't know what this is about, just giving them a flavor of it without spoiling it, trying to give them a flavor of this world, and show them why they might want to be investing some time in it. So yes, I would very much possibly do that. You also mentioned the Malazan's Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, and a Polish series about Mikhan from Robert M. Wagner, one of which still needs to be translated to English, say. So Stephen Erickson, to my shame, is an author I've never actually read. So he's on my list, my very long list of authors that I really should get round to. I have to admit, I'd not heard of Robert Wagner before. But yeah, I'm looking to expand, but we will see where we go. More on that in the new year, I think. Creative Branches saying, welcome back. Thank you. If you went on a week-long vacation in the Second Age or anywhere on Planetos, where would you go and what would you do? This is different from where you might settle down. Yeah, okay, so quite a fun question just to sort of round off these questions. I've got a couple more in the chat that I'll come to. But in terms of where I would go, a week-long vacation in the Second Age, I would love to go to Numenor, because this is the height of human civilization. It's just in the Third Age, there are so many things that are there as leftover relics from Second Age Numenor. How on earth did the Argonath, those the two big statues that they sort of paddle past going down the river, and doing the Tower of Isengard, those kinds of things, Orthanc, those kinds of things were built with technology from the Numenorians that is lost. So I would love to go back to Numenor and just explore it. The culture sounds pretty amazing as well. In terms of Planetos, if I had an ideal week off, it would be exploring old ruins and great cultures, just sampling cultures from around the world. So I think I would probably head off across to the far end of Essos just for a week, Yiti, Leng, that kind of places, with these ancient cities that are abandoned, and just wander around and try and understand what has been going on there. Okay, let's have a quick flick through to the chat. Martin S. I like how Varda hallowed the Silmarils to harm evil, and it is consistent. Morgoth and Fëanor's sons burned. Karkaroth got the worst stomachache in Middle-earth history. Yeah, Eonwë could touch them. It makes sense. Yeah, so the Silmarils are fascinating. This is obviously where the Silmarillion, the name, comes from. If you're not aware, the Silmarils, these three great, wonderful jewels, they operate in this kind of strange world as they have been hallowed by Varda, so you cannot hold them and touch them if you do not have purity in your heart. If you're unless if you're just normal mortals, you cannot do that. And so evil things they will burn, but at the same time, it's not that they're just pure good, because these came from Fëanor's forging, and he was not pure good. So they, in a very Tolkien way, they sort of foreshadow, I guess, with the One Ring, people lust after the Silmarils. People want to control them. People want to have them. This isn't a good thing. They seem to bring out bad behavior in people. So they create this kind of complex mixture of great good and great evil in one. So it's a hugely multi-layered thing from Tolkien. And it's worth saying, for Tolkien, we always kind of think of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as being the great stories, and then we've got the Silmarillion as background. That's not how he saw it. His great work was the creation of this world and the stories of the Silmarillion, effectively. And then out of that came a couple of stories that he could sell as novels. But for him, the key story, the Silmarils, are heart of it. The rings only came much later. Jude the Fourth saying, what do you think about the 2-episode battle in Rings of Power Season 2 and the animated Lord of the Rings film in 2024? Okay, so the 2-episode battle for Rings of Power, this is something they teased, is there's going to be a 2-episode battle in Season 2 of the Rings of Power. The clear implication is that this has to be the Battle of the Elves and Sauron. After the Rings of Power have been forged, Sauron forges his One Ring, tries to claim control of them all, fails. He then launches an invasion to get them back, basically. And this is great heroic stuff. He charges in, sweeps across the land. We get people like Celeborn doing acts of heroism, Elrond doing an act of heroism, the dwarves charging out from Khazad-dûm. Lots going on there. I think this is almost certainly what it is. This is also where we get the foundation of Rivendell, so look out for that in Season 2. Basically, Elrond has to retreat. He finds this secret valley. He holds up there. Refugees come in, and he sort of founds this place. And then after Sauron gets pushed back, then Gil-galad says, hey, why don't you stay here, and you can turn this into a strategically important place, and you can rule over this area here, and you can be my vice regent in this part of the world. And so that's where Rivendell comes from. So yeah, we're going to have that, I think, is what it's going to be. I'm looking forward to it. The War of the Rohirrim, this is what I was talking about just a moment ago, the animated Lord of the Rings film in 2024. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's got Brian Cox in it as a voice actor. Also, Arwen is returning. So it's looking good, and I'm very much looking forward to it, but it's still a long way away. The other thing to say, though, that is we're getting an increasing number of different companies talking about Lord of the Rings films, so expect lots of this. And when I say different companies, New Line, are making this. The chair of Warner, who own New Line, is also talking about, hey, we should have more Lord of the Rings films, so expect more there. And also, and I've forgotten the name of the company now off the top of my head, but a lot of the rights that used to Lord Tolkien's world, which used to be held by the Saul Zaentz company, have just been sold off. And this new company that owns them are talking about, hey, maybe we could make some more Lord of the Rings films. So, as I've said so many times, literally nobody understands the rights issues around Tolkien's work. So, who owns the rights to be making films in the Third Age? Possibly 2 or 3 different companies at this point in time. It's really quite hard to tell, but expect more is the short version of that. Andrew Kay saying, speaking of adaptations, I was hoping The Rings of Power would reflect on season 1. What did not work and its reception, but seems unlikely how quickly charging in season 2. Yeah, they have talked, the showrunners have talked about reflecting on season 1. I think I've got 2 sort of thoughts on this. Their thoughts on reflecting on season 1 seem to be a lot more internal, about what worked well for them in terms of what they thought worked, rather than waiting for audience reaction. Now, they did start filming. They've been filming now for about 6 weeks, maybe a month at least into season 2. So that means that they'll have been writing the scripts for that well before time. So I don't expect to see huge amounts of reflection of any critique that might have happened of season 1 to be reflected in season 2. That said, I am aware that the corporate Prime Video machine have been seeking comments from, but not me. They haven't asked me for comments on it, but have been seeking comments from some people, and feedback episode by episode, which is different to how many other companies tend to do this. Is that this is a good thing. I think these are people that they presumably will respect the opinions of and try and move forward with. So there are hints. Prime Video, for all of the good and ill that is there, they are doing things in a different way to most other studios, and some of that is good, undoubtedly good. And the attempt to crowdsource a lot of information is admirable, I would say. I think I had a couple more. Hanabe Mitra saying, are you happy with Eric Ten Hag's progress with Man United this season? I surely am happy with him as manager. I'm very happy with Eric Ten Hag. I think we need to give him time. I think it's going to come good. The Clueless Fangirl's there. Hi there, Helen. Great to see you. Clueless Fangirl has got an excellent channel all about Lord of the Rings. Do go and check that out. For my people saying, what are your thoughts on The Witcher going forward, with the rumours about the writers not liking the source material and going further away from it, causing Henry Cavill's departure? Yeah, I talked about this at length a couple of weeks ago, so I won't go into all of the details now. I think it sounds likely that at least one of the reasons why Henry Cavill left was because he was more committed to keeping his character in particular and also the story close to the books. There's a really interesting article, I think I retweeted it, if you're interested, from Redanian Intelligence, which is the best, I found certainly the best website dedicated to insider information on what's going on with The Witcher. In that, they've picked up all across Henry Cavill's comments over the 3 seasons. And basically, we know season 1, he started out saying, this is really great, I'm committing to all of it. But I do have a few notes about the character of Geralt. which was fed into season 2, and then season 2 apparently he started coming out with a few comments about, I'm happy to keep doing this for as long as it sticks close to the books. Season 2 did veer a bit away from the books. Season 3 we haven't seen yet, so we don't know, but the direction of travel seems quite clear. He did it in a classy way, though. I've got a lot of respect for him. He did it. The announcement was at the same time as the announcement of a replacement. It was timed so that there's an easy cover story that he's taken Superman back on. It's nothing to do with Superman. He said previously that he could do both Superman and The Witcher at the same time. But I think he did it in a classy way himself. What do I take from this? I think that there's a lot of different things going on. The writers' room rumors that some of the writers who may or may not still be attached to the project were not fans of the source material is concerning. If true, I don't think we need everybody who's in a writer's room to be mega fans of the source material, but I think we do. It's only fair to the source material that if anyone actively dislikes it, then they shouldn't be writing the adaptation. So where do I think it's going? I mean, I'm still remaining positive. I think that season 2 I still really enjoyed. I loved season 1 of The Witcher. We'll have to see where season 3 ends up. One of the things to look out for as well, Christmas Day, we're having Blood Origin, Witcher Blood Origin, the mini-series spin-off. Now, I've called this troubled before. I think it was a very troubled production. Started out as 6 episodes. They've contracted it down into 4. They reshot quite a bit with a completely different director. They've added in new characters. They've done a lot to this, and it was hugely delayed. The first trailer for it came out over a year ago, and now it's going to be coming out Christmas this year. I'm given to understand at least some of this is the corporate issues, which I was talking about a little bit earlier with Netflix, which is they're getting nervous about a lot of things. This is why there was a delay before they managed to agree to a season 2 of the phenomenally successful Sandman. And this is them getting a bit nervous about The Witcher. So I'm happy to give it a little bit of slack and watch it and wait and see. Am I concerned? Yes, I'm concerned. I've not heard any good and positive things out of the Witcher productions for a while. But I don't think it's beyond redemption in any stretch of the imagination. Right, let's go. I'll have a quick flick through the chat, trying to pick up as many questions. Nate Davis saying, do you think Theo will become a ring wraith? Also, those 3 weird elf ladies, are they early wraiths? So if by the 3 weird elf ladies you mean the people who are hunting for the Meteor Man, I think that they clearly were wraith-like. It wouldn't surprise me if we see them again. There wasn't much explanation given for who they are. But in terms of the main question, Theo, will he become a ring wraith? I think so. His sort of closing lines about, when I had the sword hilts, I felt powerful, and power is desire for power is rarely a good thing in Tolkien's world. Somebody giving him a ring of power certainly seems to be the logical next step for him. He then has a sword he's been given by Galadriel. He's there talking, holding it up, rabble-rousing strength to the Southlands, things like that, and supportive of Halron. So yeah, I think his arc, when you look at what he did actually in season 1, the mood music for him was dark, but he as a character actually did quite a few good and heroic things. So I think this is a slippery slope down to a bad place for him. Almost certainly a ring wraith. Yeah. Aegon Dragonborn. In Game of Thrones Season 2, the Warlock says to Daenerys that her presence strengthens the magic of her dragons. Is this magical effect book canon? So the Warlock says to Daenerys that her presence strengthens the magic of her dragons. I'm not sure if I can remember that exact quote, but basically the dragons give their presence increases the amount of magic in the world, and Dany's connection with the dragons does strengthen them. But George R. R. Martin has never explicitly said that Dany makes the dragons stronger. Dragons are independent. Just flicking through, see if they've got any more questions. Sasuke, hi, good to see you, saying we're still going. Yeah, we are. I'm still babysitting my toddler nephew, so that's why I wasn't here, but looking forward to watching it later. Nate Davis agreeing about Theo. He did some heroic things, showing signs of being a classic grey character. Ultimately, I think power corrupts him completely. Maruto saying, hi Robert, I've always liked the white tree of Minas Tirith as a symbol and the idea as to why it stopped blooming. Is there enough backstory to it that we might get a video about it? Yes, well, the white trees as a whole, yes, definitely, because we can link across well, certainly as far as Numenor, we can go back even further than that, but you will have seen in the Rings of Power, there is the white tree there in Numenor, which is a symbol of their link with the elves and their adherence to worship of Eru. And it is that that will provide one of the great heroic moments of, I hope, of the Rings of Power. The tree... #spoilers, Sauron will get organized for the tree to be chopped down and burned, but Isildur will do a one-man rescue mission to go in and just sort of salvage a bit that he can take with him to Middle-earth and plant for there to be a new tree over there. And they get a sapling, and in the boat they've got a little sapling of the white tree which they take with them. So yes, there's definitely enough there, and that's a really good idea for a video. Thank you very much. And I think with that, actually, I'm probably going to start drawing this one to a close. I've got videos coming. I've got part 2, incidentally, of that interview with Bear McCreary, who was the composer for the Rings of Power. You may remember when I spoke to him before, he teased about how there were some Easter eggs there in the soundtrack to season 1 of the Rings of Power. The One Ring theme being hidden in plain sight 2 or 3 times in episode 1, he said. So I said to him, we agreed he would come back and just tell us where those things were, plus a few other little sort of things about season 2, where we're at in terms of that, as well as some fantastic. We had a really great conversation. This was just yesterday when I was talking to him. Really great conversation about language usage and how Tolkien's language usage impacted the choir as they were recording, which is a great story. So that coming out maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday. I'll see when I can get that video edited and up. That's coming, plus more videos. I'll start getting back into the regular routine now I'm back off my holiday. Couple of new videos a week, regular Thursday live streams, and then who knows where we'll go in the new year. We'll start expanding out into new and glorious vistas, I am sure. Anyway, that's it for this time. If you're watching this back a little bit later, there will be a link appearing here to other live streams. there'll be a link appearing around about here to my Patreon page. Patreon is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you so much for all the questions today in the super chats. Moderators, you are amazing. Patrons, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. I will see you again next week.